I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, yeah, we have sorely changed. Eh, eh, see, I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Eh, eh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh,
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Hey, welcome to the show. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Yes, clap. Clap if you believe. Yes. Clap for the miracle. You don't get the miracle if you don't clap. Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. I was not here last week I was out of town for a medical thing, so I'm so excited to be back with you and me, Spike Cohen. As always, feel free to comment with any questions or any thoughts that you have, and my guest and I will tell you if you're right or wrong. We'll definitely tell you if you're wrong. If you're right, no, we'll tell you regardless. Feel free to please hit, if you're watching this on YouTube later on, hit subscribe, hit the bell. We need to hit the bell so you can get all of our content. Follow us on SoundCloud, follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Get our DMs. Every time I say I'm going to find out what that means, I don't know what it means, but do that. This is a Muddied Water Media's production in conjunction with Muddied Waters Media. Thank you again to Muddied Waters for giving me this opportunity. I'd like to thank Kroger for my delicious flavored water that I drink on this and every episode of My Fellow Americans that I'm not in Florida, because I don't drink Kroger water in Florida. They have much better water there. My intro and outro music that I use on this and every episode of My Fellow Americans is from the talented Joe Davi, Jodavi. Find him on Facebook, on SoundCloud. Go to his Bandcamp. Buy all of his music. I swear to you, you will be so happy if you do that. He's a very talented guy. Shout out to Tehran Turks' mom and him. Guys, I am so honored to have my guest on tonight. He was actually my very first guest, but we don't talk about that episode because I had no idea what I was doing. It was a huge mess. Go check it out on YouTube, by the way. He is the host of the Lou Sanders Show. He is one of my favorite anarchists on the internet. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to my show the beautiful and talented Lou Sanders. Lou, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be had by Spike Cohen. And that really wasn't first episode.
That wasn't a real first episode. Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. It wasn't real.
Yeah, if the communists can say that it's not real communism when communism fails, then that definitely was not a first real episode. This is actually my first episode. So thank you for joining.
Yeah,
That's why we don't.
It's not real communism until the party members die with the proletariat.
Right, exactly. And it's not a real episode until I have actual equipment. So this is the first real episode. Thank you for joining me on my first episode. Like I said, now I have real equipment. I know not to end everything I say as though it's the question. So I've learned a lot, and so I'm looking forward to showing you just how much I've grown in the last 3 months. So the last time you were on here, which we don't talk about, it was the 4th of July. We basically spent 2 hours savaging the Founding Fathers, the Constitution, the Revolutionary War. I think we had some bad things to say about apple pie. It was a lot of fun.
Apple pie without raisins and icing on it was not real apple pie.
That is arguably the most controversial thing you may say today. I've with raisins and what was the other thing? Frosting?
Icing. No, it's icing. Yeah, it's icing, not frosting.
On apple pie?
Yes.
Okay.
It's made up of a powdered sugar with hot water and just a pinch of salt.
And raisins.
Yes. The raisins actually make it a Dutch apple pie.
Wow. Okay, well then, like I said, this may be the most contentious thing we talk about. I would eat that. I think I would eat that, but I've never heard of that. Well, moving on.
Really? You're a southerner. You're a southerner.
I am a southerner.
Raisins are nature's candy.
No, I like raisins.
With you?
I've just never heard of it on apple pie.
In apple pie, you bake the raisins in with the pie.
I will try that. Thanksgiving's coming up. That's perfect opportunity to try this. I will put that in the show notes. So, by the way, congratulations on surviving the social media purge of late 2018.
It's not over yet.
No. God.
There's always time.
Yeah, so as you know, and as for those in my lovely viewing audience who don't know, yesterday or the day before, or a couple days ago, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and all the other major social media platforms did sort of a coordinated purge from their venues of hundreds of pages and channels like the Free Thought Project, Cop Block, that's COP, Cop Block, Punk Rock Libertarians, Police the Police, and many others, a ton of pages that I follow. And they said that this was done because of spamming. I don't believe they actually presented any evidence of spamming. I know there are some people saying, well, some pages did make it and they didn't, but they seem to hit all the biggest ones. Facebook actually specifically mentioned the upcoming midterm elections as part of their reason for doing it now. So it's hard to think that, oh, well, it's just because they were spamming. What do you think of that?
I don't tend to have the conspiratorial thoughts out there. I do find it a little bit interesting, concerning. I don't really know. It's, from what I understand, the pages that have been taken down, and I don't know all of them,
right,
have been more anti-establishment, libertarian, anarchist types.
Right.
And I don't think that too many cat meme pages were taken down.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, it was spamming. Like, there's a ton of spam on Facebook.
Okay, so I have absolutely no inside information as to why these things are going the way that they are,
right?
Or if there's some master plan, or if Zuckerberg is sitting in his chair petting the kitty cat as he's just like doing Zuckerbergy type stuff.
Right.
I don't know that any of this is going on, but what I will tell you is that Facebook, they're very, how could I put it? They're very supportive of the system. You remember when the deadline to register to vote was going on, and they kept spamming everybody's news feed with these posts about, have you registered to vote yet? It's your civic duty.
They're doing it right now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
so I think that the horizontal enforcement that you get out of Facebook and similar type organizations, hey, it's our democracy type stuff.
Right.
I think that has a tendency to try to stifle out conflicting ideology. And of the pages that were taken down that I know of for a fact, they're very anti-establishment. And to go a little bit further, and I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. I remember reading a book a few years back, and it was about a guy who was a lobbyist, and he was a lobbyist back in probably the early 70s. How he wound up a lobbyist, I can't really remember. It's kind of he just kind of fell into it. He was kind of like a fixer type.
Okay.
And wound up being a lobbyist. But anyway, he was talking about how the graft was going on, and how when somebody got busted for doing something, it wasn't the house being cleaned up. It was more selective enforcement and sacrificial lambs.
Right. Of course.
And I remember one of the quotes in there is talking about Gerald Ford, and they're talking, and Gerald was Speaker of the House, and they're talking to him about all this stuff, and his comment on it was the system must be preserved at all costs. So they were willing to sacrifice a few and let many go, and particularly we saw this after. Well, we didn't see it because we were just little kids and didn't know what the heck was going on.
Right.
But people a little bit older than us saw that after Nixon getting jammed up, there was really there's lost faith in the institution of government. So it was shaken to the very foundations. And what you get out of like the politically minded, you take your partisan Republicans and everybody else, the ones that go on Fox News and MSNBC, and they're just screaming and hollering at each other. And it's pro wrestling. I mean, they fight like crazy when the cameras are on.
Yeah,
then they go out to dinner with each other and bounce each other's kids on their laps and all this sort of stuff. It's not a Pizzagate reference. Not that it's an impossibility, but anyway, so.
As far as we know, that's not what's happening, right?
Right. So they don't care that people are arguing and fighting and ending lifelong friendships and splitting up families over red versus blue, Coke versus Pepsi, whatever you want to call it.
They thrive on it, yeah.
They don't care. They don't care that people are arguing about those things and making death threats and everything else. What they absolutely do not want is an alternative option. So long as you're arguing about which one of them is going to rule you versus whether you should be ruled in the first place, they're fine. When you start questioning if you should be ruled
at all,
that is when, because you're going outside of the Overton window, the 3x5 card of allowable opinion, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Once you get outside of that, that's when they start getting scared, because the people in power, whether the politicians or if you buy into the notion that their patrons are the real power behind it, because these politicians, they need financing, they need support, they need the what is it? In Russian, it's called blat. It's not necessarily bribes, but it's favors. They need the help that they get from the connected and the wealthy, the power elite types.
Right. And so when you have these pages that are talking specifically about that and not falling into this, left-right Republican Democrat paradigm, that really upsets the apple cart, and that's sort of verboten and has to go.
Absolutely, ganz verboten.
I don't know German. I just know verboten. So.
Totally prohibited.
Right. So this is a tough subject to talk to people about, because my whole thing and obviously, so censorship obviously is when government stops you from doing something, silences you. If a private, and this is, I'm talking in very general terms, when a private venue doesn't allow you to use their platform, whether it's me, if you come into my house and start saying, things that I don't agree with, and I say, okay, I'm sorry, you need to leave my house, or we're on the phone and you say things I don't agree with, and I go, okay, I don't want to hear that, and I hang up. I'm not censoring you. I'm simply saying I don't want to associate with you. And in the same token, even a large venue, even if it's if it's a private venue, if it's not government run, and it's run by a private company, they have the right to say, okay, we, for whatever reason, they don't want to associate with whomever, for whatever reasons. Where it gets murky is that, for example, with Facebook,
the murky waters of freedom.
The murky waters of freedom, as always. Where it gets muddied, if you will, is that for example, Facebook is partnered with it's a group called the Atlantic Council that helps them to determine
Yes.
what is good and bad content. The Atlantic Council is essentially a NATO lobby organization. If you look at their board, I was looking at it while we were talking just now, while I was listening to you. Their board of directors is all over the place. They have, CEOs of major companies, current and former politicians and lobbyists. They have an international advisory board that has prime ministers and former prime ministers on it. So it is not necessarily in and of itself a government organization, but it exists for lobbying to government. And it is in the ear of Facebook and others, I'm sure, telling them who is and is not allowed.
It's I guess you could call it a quasi-governmental organization, or
Right.
it's like the NGOs. You have a lot of NGOs providing aid in South Africa, and they're non-government organizations,
Right.
although a lot of them are.
Yeah.
They're other government agencies. But
Right.
anywho,
Right.
you brought up a very interesting point, and also I believe that the Atlantic Council gets some of its funding from the U.S. government, to include the U.S. military.
Oh, I would assume. I mean,
Yeah.
they're
Don't
described as a
quote me on
Navy. They're described as a NATO lobby group, so I'm sure there's
Right.
Pentagon and State Department money in there. There's no way that they're operating without getting that. They're getting tax money at some
Yeah.
point. That's happening.
And I want to do a plug for my source for this information.
Absolutely.
Ford Fisher, who's from News to Share.
Yeah,
He had put up a couple posts on that. Oh, he did really good reporting from the Charlottesville nonsense a couple years ago, I think it was. I got a
He's
chance
done
to
some
talk to
amazing.
him.
Yeah, from that,
I got
from the
you-
resist protests, he's done a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, I got a chance to talk to him after Charlottesville, but unfortunately, I couldn't put out the audio on it. It was audio problems, to say the
Oh
least.
no,
But anyhow,
that sucks.
But anyway, so yeah, he had reported on that, and he'd done a little research, and he says, yeah, they made it real easy because I found the news release from Facebook, and he posted that saying that that Facebook was partnered up with the Atlantic Council or whatever
Right.
whatever it is, and then he showed links to the Atlantic Council website
Right.
of who the partners are and everything else. So it's you get into the question of, is Facebook really a private company, or are they also a quasi-governmental organization?
They're definitely threading the line, and still, here's my thing with this. So the part of the reason that we have that question is because for many, I don't think for us, but for many, the next question becomes, well, if they're not a private organization, should we not then be having government essentially force them to allow everyone in, or to create some kind of standard for who can or can't be allowed? And here's my thing. Let's say that Facebook is a quasi-governmental organization. Let's say they're a government organization. And let's say that we're asserting, which we sort of are, that government is at least partially responsible for them silencing certain voices. What compelling reason do we have to think that getting government more involved is the answer to, having a greater flow of opinion? To me, it seems like, okay, let's say they pass the Social Media Fairness Act, and what happens now is, and I scare myself because that's probably what it's going to be called, now you've got government telling them what they're going to do. I can guarantee you that one of the commenters mentioned another group, Tom Trial, in the comments said the art of not being governed. That was the other one that was unpublished. I can imagine that if government gets involved, those groups aren't coming back anyway. And now Facebook will be able to say, okay, but in exchange for this, we're now a utility, and so we get, we're going to entrench our position as dominant social media. Whereas to me, it seems like the better answer would be to deregulate these things so that there's more, viable options and lower barriers to entry for competitors to come in, so that we don't have to rely on Facebook. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that's a lot of stuff that you covered, and I don't believe that the art of not being covered has been taken down.
Oh, okay.
It's still up, but a couple of nights ago, the admins got the old session expired message, and the message saying that the page was unpublished.
Right. Oh, okay. So it's still up, but they can't do anything with it.
Yeah, but
Okay.
this is the second art of not being governed. It was previously there's a previous version of it that was taken down a year or so ago,
Oh, okay. I didn't know
maybe
that.
2 years ago.
Okay.
So and that was due to multiple complaints.
Like reporting or
Yes. And we're going to kind of get into that a little bit later on.
okay.
But yeah,
Okay.
that was about getting reported frequently. But what you did mention in going into the whole discussion of the free speech issue, the censorship issue, and then what is Facebook? Is it a private company or whatever? I've
Right.
heard a lot of people talking about how their free speech, or I really hate when somebody says my First Amendment was violated.
Was violated. Yeah.
Yeah, you have amendments. No, you don't. You have rights, you idiot.
Right.
Sorry, that's just one of those little status idiosyncrasies.
My First Amendment right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I was talking to this. I don't know if he's a sovereign citizen type, but he was certainly a status libertarian at PorkFest a couple of years ago, and Indian guy, casino, not tech support, and he was talking about how the cops were messing him.
Liz Warren Indian, you mean?
No, real one. He wasn't that white, and he had a mohawk. He had a really cool motorcycle too. But anyway, he was telling me about how the cops were messing with him, and he's like, yeah, they violated 3 of my amendments. I'm like, what are you talking about? You don't have amendments.
Right.
You're a human being,
Right.
not a piece of parchment.
Right.
But anyway, so the First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion, blah blah blah, or freedom of speech.
Right.
So if Congress is making a law restricting your speech, then it's not covered by the First Amendment. Now the other thing is with free speech, you always have free speech, but you do not always have a free audience or a free platform.
Right.
That's the important thing to discover or to realize. And a lot of these folks do not understand that there's a difference. They think that their right to speak and be heard is universal, and that if they want to talk about whatever stupid thing that they want to talk about, everybody has to sit there and listen to them.
Right.
And I think most of them understand that the people don't have to agree, but they think that people have to listen.
They have to stand there and listen, right? Exactly. They can't say get
Yeah.
out. Like if you go into a mall and just start screaming about whatever, and they say, "Sir, you have to leave." They're like, "My free speech." No, you it's private property, and you don't actually have to. They don't have to let
Right.
you in. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have a right to free speech, but you don't have a right to a platform or a audience. And let me read directly from the Constitution regarding free speech and religion. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Citizens are guaranteed freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, demonstration, and association. The state shall guarantee conditions for the free activity of democratic political parties and social organizations. The next part. Citizens have freedom of religious beliefs. This right is granted by approving the construction of religious buildings and the holding of religious ceremonies. No one may use religion as a pretext for drawing in foreign forces or for harming the state and social order.
Right.
That's Chapter 5, Articles 67 and 68 of the North Korean Constitution. Just thought I would drop that out there.
I like
And-
that.
Yeah. So, and as a matter of fact, China, the Chinese Constitution recognizes free speech in Article 35 of theirs. The old Soviet and old East German constitutions recognized free speech also.
Turns out their parchments aren't magic either.
Probably not. But anyway, so I just thought I would share that with you.
Yeah. No, thank you for doing that.
About your constitutional rights.
Right.
So chapter
My
5
amendments.
Chapter 5 of the North Korean Constitution is the rights and duties of citizens, where their rights are clearly enumerated. And of course, because it's in the Constitution, they're not violated.
Right. Right. Exactly.
So now, what are your thoughts on this as far as at what point does Facebook cease to be a private entity and become an extension of government?
See, and obviously it's some kind of a spectrum, right? Like A fully private company is one that doesn't to say where no one disputes that you're a private company, it means you're not even doing business with the government. You're not contract essentially a private company, and but as the more you get into it, you're contracting with government to do things. The majority of your work is with government, or you have people that are lobbying in government. In a statist society, a big company like Facebook is not going to be allowed to be that big and that dominant without having government tentacles in it and having their tentacles in government through lobbying. I mean, to the point where you literally had earlier this year, Mark Zuckerberg was in front of Congress talking about the fact that that they were following their own privacy policy on releasing data to advertisers and things like that. So it's a blurry thing. I still say that Facebook, from what we know, and Tom Trial in the comments mentioned that sometimes you don't know everything because there's stuff that's being secretly told that we don't know, and that's that's the problem. Based on what we know, I still say Facebook's a private company. Regardless of whether they're a private company or not, the people that are saying they're censoring us because we think that they're a private company, therefore they're censoring us, and they need to stop. It's one thing to advocate for them to stop, but when you advocate for the state to get involved in doing it, if you're saying the government was censoring you to begin with, what makes you think that having more government involvement is going to end with you not being censored? That's my position on it.
Oh, exactly. It when you look at the high price of healthcare these days, and healthcare is very expensive,
Yeah,
and if you have any sort of economic education, you paid any attention, and you've seen all the government intervention in the healthcare industry and markets over the past several decades, and you're like, okay, well, how did it get this way? And you can look at all these different government interventions to see where the prices have escalated after these different interventions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
That's the reason to say, no, you've already helped the living daylights out of us already. No, can't do any more of that.
Right, exactly.
But there's people out there that believe that there's a completely free market. Government has been completely laissez-faire. They haven't been involved in anything. This Medicare, Medicaid, that's that doesn't even exist. Forget about that. Forget about the requirements to treat people at emergency rooms and then just stick the cost on other people.
Right.
So
right.
They're of the mind that that the free market was just going along plundering and pillaging everybody, and for no reason whatsoever. Because of that, the government had to get involved and clean up the mess of the free market.
Right. Well, and while simultaneously ignoring that it got worse when they got involved, and continues to get worse when they get involved, and therefore the answer is to get. And that's the thing to me. These are people that otherwise, because a lot of the people saying this are libertarians. These are people that usually would say, healthcare is worse. Now they're being silenced on a very large, media platform, and pretty much on all the major media platforms. They're saying something has to be done. Well, why wouldn't the something be to create an alternative? If it's really true that we're not going to be allowed to say these things on social media, why would the answer not immediately be to go to someone else? Especially if we're acknowledging right off the bat, we're not saying it's because of the free market that this is happening. We're saying this is government doing this. Government is influencing it. Congress is in, Facebook's ear saying, this is going to upset things for the midterms. We need people to, participate in this ridiculous system. We know all of that. So why would our answer be, oh no, government needs to get in and tell them to let us talk?
Because those people, and if they're like the political libertarians or the min statists, they still have faith in the state. And there's there's a lot of anarchists out there, voluntarists, whatever you want to call them. They still have a faith in the state for certain things because it's their hot button item.
Right.
It's their crazy cat spot. So like on a cat, if you go and scratch it behind its ears, it will start kicking its leg.
Yeah, dogs do that too. Yeah.
So that's a crazy cat spot. And for people that, particularly if they're politically minded, they think, hey, we're going to pass a law we, me and the mouse in my pocket,
Right.
are going to pass this law. And all of a sudden, because politicians scribble some words down on paper, these things are going to happen. There's going to be changes, and people are going to behave. Never mind that healthcare didn't become more affordable when the Affordable Care Act was passed. It got more
Right.
expensive. Never mind that when alcohol and drugs were prohibited, the people kept using drugs and alcohol. And as a matter of fact, after a couple of years into prohibition, alcohol use was higher than it was before prohibition.
Yeah, no, exactly. Alcohol was at its worst. I mean, here and then okay, great. Then there's the fact that they do things to make problems worse. For example, we're in an opioid and heroin epidemic, and a big part of the reason for that is because heroin prices, compared to other drug prices and just in general, are at all-time lows. The reason they're at all-time lows is because access to the U.S. market is at all-time highs and supply is at all-time highs. The reason that it's at all-time highs is because you have the U.S. military protecting poppy fields, which is where the majority of opium production happens in Afghanistan, to fight off the Taliban. And then you have, U.S. government-sponsored drug cartels and distributors bringing them into the U.S. And so they have no problem with that because they get a piece of it for, clandestine, operations or whatever, and to fight against the cartels that are sponsored by other governments. But then when they get here and American citizens are selling, a dime bag of, or whatever they call it, of heroin to, a heroin addict, that person gets demonized, even though the government is the big part of why it got here in such high supply anyway. And that's another perfect example. The government created this problem. We need the government to do something about it. Well, maybe just stop doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I remember what was it, net neutrality that they were talking
Yes,
about, and
net neutrality, yeah.
and there were a lot of min statists and political libertarians and anarchists that were endorsing that one too. So I just looked at the history of government intervention and I started deeming it first net neutralization and then the Affordable Internet Act.
Affordable Internet, Obama Net.
Yeah, and the same thing goes with the bordertarians and the Republicans.
Exactly.
The Republicans will say, well, you can't have open borders with a welfare state. And yeah, that's a really good red meat quote, and I'm sure in their circles it really goes quite a long ways. But in reality, it's really a useless, nonsensical slogan. Because what are they calling for? Are they calling for securing the borders, meaning putting troops down there or other government employees that they're going to have to pay pensions for? What's going to happen? How's the border going to get secured? The government can't even keep guns and weapons and drugs out of their own prisons. And there's nothing more governmenty than a prison, except for maybe mass graves.
Except for what?
Mass graves.
That's peak government there, yeah.
Peak government right there.
Yep,
so anyway.
Right. Well, I think you had actually said, it was you that posted that said, okay, great, let's say that we can't have unlimited, we can't have, open immigration without ending the welfare state. And you said, well, okay, so then why doesn't the state end welfare for immigrants? And if they're not able to do that, what makes you think, and I'm paraphrasing, what makes you think that this organization that is so, hapless that they can't stop non-citizens from getting access to welfare, that they're somehow going to turn a massive landmass into a giant fortress that no one can get into or out of without them knowing? What makes you think they're going to be able to do that or want to do that?
What I really said was, how are they going to keep themselves, or if they can't keep themselves from giving money to people that are ineligible to receive it, how are they going to keep people that are ineligible from coming in here and working?
Exactly. Yep.
And the promise is that the savings from the welfare reductions will go to pay for the wall, just like the savings from Obamacare was going to go to pay for the care.
Right.
Right. The reductions in Medicaid and other
bending
expenditures.
the cost curve. Yeah.
So I know, obviously, when some Republican, some Trumpanzee starts talking about build the wall, obviously it's okay. I'm not a supporter of your Affordable Border Control Act because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be the Affordable Border Control Act. It's going to be another lie, and when it comes up costing more than it was supposed to, they're going to defend it like the Democrats defended Obamacare, and then they're going to deny that, or then the Democrats are going to get on the bandwagon and say, ha ha ha, you guys bollocks this whole thing up. It was supposed to be cheap, but it costs more. Still got
Right.
the welfare state. You bunch of big spending liberals.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and that's, they go back and forth. When one side is in charge, and I use side loosely because I think they're all on the same side, but when one of the partisan parties is in charge, the other side becomes the deficit hawks and the you're overspending and, we shouldn't be at war and, all of these things. And then when the other party gets in charge, they switch places. Now this side is the resistance against, deficit spending and wasteful spending and everything else, and the side that's in charge is demanding respect for the institution of the government, and it's ridiculous to me. So I think we're on the same page with social media. In the comments, Zebulun Ballas, I hope I didn't just butcher your name there, said Facebook is a government entity just based on precedents. There's zero way that it isn't a data collection tool of the state. There's at least a state element of the core people at the top level complying with dark government. Absolutely, I don't dispute that at all. I think that like I said, whether it's Walmart, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Apple, any of these massive companies that in my mind wouldn't be sustainable in an actual free market. The only way that they get that big, first of all, the only way that they're even allowed to get that big, and second of all, the way that they're able to maintain that dominance and stop competitors from entering that sector and competing with them, or any more competitors than they already have, is by getting as chummy with government as possible. It's sort of what they tell us happens when we vote, except it actually does happen when you bribe them and have lobbyists and everything else. Is you get that entrenched power, and what comes with it is that essentially the government ends up controlling it. Where I diverge from with other people who come to that conclusion is that, like we were just talking about, that government getting more involved is going to somehow help anything.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's if you look at the history of the antitrust period, I think this really kicked off under Teddy Roosevelt. He made all these promises of things that were going to happen, that they were going to break the cartelization of industry, and surprisingly enough, industry was begging for these regulations, saying, "Yeah, we need to be controlled so that we don't do anything wrong." Blah blah blah.
Exactly.
And it's like, don't throw me in the briar patch.
Yeah.
But anyway, towards the end of it, you had industry was even more cartelized than before where they started. And you had these smaller firms getting eliminated, and these larger firms were the ones that were left standing. And
because they can take it. It'll hurt their bottom line to some extent because they can still absorb it. And the smaller companies can't, and then they come out stronger because they lost their competition's gone.
Yeah, their body's going to absorb the poison a lot better than the smaller bodies.
Exactly.
That have less of immunity.
Right.
So it was really interesting because when I first got into libertarianism, it was strictly through economics, and later on, it was through the morality of it.
Right.
I remember listening to a Tom Woods lecture, and he was talking about the different things to break up the so-called monopolies and everything else. And quite frankly, there's absolutely no way that there could be a natural monopoly, because think about this. What would it take to dominate an industry to such an extent that you had no effective competition out there? Even if you combine the competition of, even if you combine all these small firms as like one competition against you,
right.
Like combine all their powers, how would you get that way? Because you got to figure, in order to get customers to go to you, you have to satisfy their wants. And considering that many people are very subjective in the things that they want, it's rather arbitrary. Some people want the best price. Some people want the best quality. Some people want the best value, which is price and quality put together. Some people want a company that is socially conscious. Some people want a company that does all these different things, and there's all these arbitrary subjective values out there. And for a company to be able to crush the competition, it would have to satisfy every last one of these values. It would have to
Every
at least
single
satisfy.
one. Yep.
Yeah, it would have to at least satisfy enough customers to where they chose to go with that company versus all the other options out there.
Right.
So the only way to be that good is to, I hate to sound like Yogi Berra, but the only way to be that good is you have to be really good at it. You would have to be very skilled. You would have to be very customer oriented.
You have to be
You would have
perfect.
to,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes, you would have to be absolutely positively awesome sauce. And that's an impossibility,
Right.
because when you do have the competition out there, there's going to be other people that think up ideas. Hey, what can we do to steal business away from them?
Right.
And one of the things that I heard about was one of the phrases he used was, nobody hates free market capitalism more than free market capitalists, because when you have the small scrappy company that's just entering the market and they're at the bottom but they're going to the top, they love the competition, they love the fight, the hunt, the challenge, the gladiatorial market games that go on with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then when they get to the top, they want to stay there, and they don't want to. They don't want to go out and defend their title. They're the boxer that becomes the world heavyweight champion,
Right.
and then fights like once every 2 or 3 years
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
against some bum.
Right. Just to keep their belt. Exactly. Yeah. No. And that's why I don't see anything good coming from that.
So let me go back though. If a company was good enough, if they were able to satisfy the needs of that many customers, that they could draw that much business in there, that is not a company that should be broken up. That is a company that should be modeled, studied, replicated, and everything else.
Exactly.
Because why would you crush success? Because that is the picture of success.
Yeah. If you're keeping even say 95% of your potential base so happy that it's almost impossible to have anyone be your competitor, that means you're essentially perfect, or as close to perfect as humanly possible, which, like you said, why would that be a bad thing? And the very second you start to fall off, here comes your competition. That's what a free market is. So if we really reached a point where there were these, multiple monopolies, and a true monopoly usually doesn't just mean that you have market dominance, it means that you have elements in place to prevent competition. So let's not say monopolies, because we're talking about just totally dominant, a company that just they don't have any effective competition because they're just doing such a good job.
They're protected.
Great. Yeah, they're exactly. A monopoly is actually protected, and that's you can't really have a true monopoly without the state, and the state in and of itself is a monopoly. But so you can't. In my mind, in a free market, Facebook is only going to be dominant for as long as it's providing the best value for the vast majority of people. The very second it starts to fall off, or even if they just exclude.
The other thing.
Go ahead.
The other thing that I want to touch on, and this comes from F.A. Hayek, who was a student of Ludwig von Mises, and he talked about the thing with free market capitalism and the fact that in the market you have to satisfy your customers' needs, and all the stuff that I already said and repeated several times.
Right.
And because of that, capitalism renders greed completely harmless.
Yep.
So if I'm greedy and I want to get if I want to get the most money possible, the only way that I can do that in the truly free capitalistic market is I have to satisfy my customers' needs. So if I get rewarded by putting out great products with wealth, then how am I a villain? How am I a bad guy? And the anti-commerce types, they have such a tendency to hate against all this stuff. They have a hatred of success, but it's only for business people. It's for like Walmart, and Walmart really does a lot of things well.
Oh, of course.
They're not surviving strictly because government is protecting them. They do things well. They have an excellent distribution system. It's very efficient. It's their pricing is good because they negotiate good prices.
Right. They revolutionized retail. I mean, the world of retail has been Walmartized because of the Sam Walton model and what they've consistently done to change it. So no, they're not there solely because of government intervention, and neither is Amazon, who is changing the world of e-commerce. The idea that you can just all this stuff that you're looking at here is stuff I got. It was on sale. It was here within 2 business days, and there were hundreds of reviews and videos on it and everything else. So so they get there because of that. But there is an element of once they're there, like you said, you're the heavyweight champ. Yeah, you're still tuned up, you're still good to fight, but you're not as hungry as you used to be. At this point, you're just trying to keep the belt, and that's what happens with these major companies. And with the state being all the more ready to do it in exchange for their pound of flesh, that allows them to start to fall off on the customer service end and providing quality to the market, and more towards, well, we're just entrenched because we have the right political people that keep barriers to entry to make it harder for our competition and make it easier for us. Net neutrality we were talking about earlier, Comcast.
Net neutralization.
Obama Net.
The Affordable Internet Act.
The Affordable Internet Act. All of the major tech and IT, or not IT, all of the major networks, all of the major service providers, all of them were on board. And yet people would still look at me with a straight face and say, oh, this is to keep them under control. And I said, well, why are they so in favor of it? Why are they demanding that it stay in place? And why is it that it's the smaller tech firms that are saying this is destroying our industry? But, that is what it is.
That's a question that, in my opinion, answers itself.
Exactly. So I'm sorry, did you have more you wanted to say about that?
Like I said, economics was my introduction to libertarianism. I wasn't looking to become a libertarian or an anarchist, voluntarist, whatever you want to call me. I had no intention of that. To kind of tell my story a little bit, after the 2008 collapse, I was like most people out there that had zero economic education or zero quality economic education. I was scratching my head saying, well, holy crap, apparently this free market capitalism that we've had all this time has failed.
It's failed us.
The government needs to step in and start running this stuff.
Right.
And so I decided I wanted to learn why things work the way that they do.
Right.
So that I could vote harder later on and get the right people in office to
vote your way to freedom, everyone.
Yeah.
Vote your way to freedom.
So we could centrally plan the economy and avoid all this stuff. Centrally plan out the boom and bust of the business cycle and everything else. And as I was learning about all these different interventions, and with Tom Woods, he's primarily a historian, but he has a lot of economic knowledge, and he looks at the historical economics of the different times.
Right.
And one of the things, and when I first heard of him, I was watching Glenn Beck, like all good aspiring libertarians do. Now, actually, I'm a recovering neocon. But unlike
I am too. Yeah.
Unlike most neocons, I've actually been in the military. But anyway, so I'm watching Glenn Beck, and Tom Woods is on there, and he starts talking about the Forgotten Depression of 1920 and 21.
Yes, with Harding, right?
Yeah, it started out under Wilson, I believe, but because Wilson was incapacitated by a stroke and his wife was basically running the country in his place, there was no intervention going on.
Right.
And then Harding came in, and Mr. Laissez-faire himself, Herbert Hoover, said, "Well, we have to have stimulus. We have to have public works programs and jobs programs, all this other stuff." And they're like, "LOL, TLDR, we're not messing with that stuff." And they did nothing really. Right. There was very little activity on the part of the Fed. Nothing significant as far as monetary policies to change things. And this thing was done in like 18 to 24 months.
Yep.
Now, in comparison, you have the Great Depression, which really, depending upon how you want to set your definitions, really went from 1929 to 1945. Yep. You had a crappy economy in there. Whether the entire time meets the official definition of a depression, no, it probably doesn't, because there were probably some quarters that didn't meet the written out definition of it. But the economy sucked for pretty much the entire time. And there was a belief that after the Great Depression, like 1946, that there was going to be a whole new depression after that, because you weren't going to have the war going on anymore. You didn't have the public works projects of the New Deal. And people argue over which one ended the Great Depression, whether it was the New Deal or the war itself. And quite frankly, it's a BS argument, because either way, if one would have ended the Great Depression, the other one would have too, because it was the same damn thing. It was the government taking complete control of the economy, nationalizing resources, putting people into the military, which would be the equivalent of the public works programs. And people talk about what a great economy that there was. No, there wasn't a great economy. Money was diverted out of the market and useful things to stuff that would never get used by the general public.
Right.
I mean, World War II, from 1943 to 1945, Ford Motor Company didn't make any vehicles for civilian use.
Right.
So darn near everything that was produced during World War II was blown up.
Yeah, it was blown up. It was used overseas, and you know, whatever you want to argue about GDP numbers or whatever, people were having their metal taken from them to you know. I've seen the posters. My dad was a kid during that time, but I've seen the posters of, you know, give up anything you have that has iron. How can you argue that that was a good economy for the average American during that time, when people were literally like having their metal taken off of their, you know, railing of their front steps or whatever to make you know, ammunition? Or I mean, it's like the argument there. I'm like, people, it sucked during the war. Like, first of all, you didn't even know if your loved ones were alive or not overseas. The boom that happened after the World War II largely happened because people breathed a sigh of relief. They were actually allowed a certain level of something resembling freedom, and there was a massive ramping down of government spending. That's what, you know, made the economy blossom afterwards.
Yeah. Well, let's take it a little bit further. Not only were they having their metal confiscated, it was illegal to manufacture many basic consumer goods. You couldn't buy new appliances. You couldn't buy things that had metal in it.
Right.
You couldn't get appliances repaired. I mean, there were advertisements in the newspaper saying, buy this new refrigerator before it's illegal. You had rationing of basic food items. You had rationing of gasoline. You had rationing of sugar, basic food staples, the things that people need to survive.
Right.
And they talk about the unemployment was fixed by mobilizing the troops during World War II. Well, you know what they did? They took the young and healthy men out of the factories and replaced them with their wives, children, and grandparents.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Full employment.
Yeah. Taking people out of the workforce and replacing them with weaker people. And I'm sorry, there's probably going to be some people out there that are like, oh, that's mean. That's politically incorrect to say that stuff. But it's true. Taking these young and healthy people out of the workforce, replacing them with their wives, children, and parents. Rationing of goods, just destroying everything. You don't have this stuff. It's illegal to produce things for the consumer market, and shortages, rationing, all this crap. That's not economic success. That's bleeping socialism.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's what we see. It's to some extent what we see in places like, you know, North Korea, where they're constantly in crisis mode. It's just, it was happening over here, and it was normalized by propaganda. So no, I agree with you 100%. Now, you, of course, as we know, you are a prominent advocate for the Libertarian Party. You know that. No, since I've had...
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope. I usually don't swear on these things, but I am the breakaway Republic of Fuck-Offistan, and my capital city is Constantinople.
Yeah. So since I've had you on last time, I've had a few guests who work for the Libertarian Party, and they have made some, you know, their thing, and some of them are, you know, anarchists and anarcho-capitalists and whatever else, and they... you know, their whole thing is, we want to end the state, and the state's never going to end itself. You know, I'm happy to see, if for no other reason, I'm happy to see that they're out there talking about, you know, libertarian thought, and they're talking to people about Rothbard, and they're talking to people about Hayek, and they're talking to people about von Mises and whatever else. So, you know, I don't think anything they're doing is particularly harmful. I don't necessarily know if it's helpful either. here's one thing that they have said to me, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this when I go back and forth with them about this.
Hang on. Before you go in there,
Okay.
what if they're going to have a campaign to take down the state, through like whatever political process? What was the campaign and process that was used to take down MySpace? How about BlackBerry? How about the DeLorean, or not the DeLorean? That was actually
That was the government took the DeLorean.
Yeah. The Edsel. The Edsel.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, that's a good point. So one thing they brought up, and I don't really have a good answer. Actually, I do have an answer, but it's not an answer you'd like. So one thing they bring up is, and it's always cut and dry with this, but they'll say, if, for example, in your area, your county, city, whatever, there were a referendum on whether or not to increase a tax or introduce a new tax, what would you do? If we're saying, that
Coming from Michigan, that is a very good question, and I will be more than happy to tell you this true story.
Okay.
I can't remember what year it was. I think it may have been in May of 2016, something like that.
Okay.
There was a special referendum in the summertime. It was in May, and it was a proposed gas tax. And it wasn't a giant gas tax, but it was enough. And the roads in Michigan are absolutely positively horrible.
Okay.
When you talk about who would build the roads, a gang of really dumb chimpanzees that escaped from the zoo could probably do a better job than the Michigan DOT.
Right.
So anyway, the common folk they're just so absolutely fed up with the gas taxes and the crappy roads, and there's a lot of money that's spent. It's government giveaways. The MEDC, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is basically the welfare office for businesses. It's the food stamps and Section 8 for businesses.
For companies, yeah.
They just throw money around left and right, and it's politically connected. It's the state level version of the Solyndra scam. But anyway, so
Right.
This thing got voted down 80% to 20%. It may have even been 81-19.
Oh wow.
You can't get people to agree 80% on which type of puppy is the cutest, or if puppies or kittens are cuter than each other.
Right.
You can't get 80% of the people to agree on doodly squat, but on this they did. And the referendum went down in flames, and the message was sent: we're sick and tired of your taxes.
Right.
So anyway, when the state government was in session, they passed the gas tax increase, and on January 1st, just a few months later, it went into effect.
After the so it was like a non-binding resolution, or was it binding? Well, clearly. Well, let me rephrase that, because clearly it wasn't binding. Was it supposed to be a binding resolution, or?
They had a special election, I think, if not primarily for that, only for that. But
Okay.
But here's the thing.
But they ignored it completely, right?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, they ignored it. They said, "Oh, okay, we have heard you speak. We have heard your voice. We have heard your whimper.
Voice has been heard. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Now go bleep off."
Right.
So, well, I mean, they could always say, "Hey, we didn't pass that gas tax increase that you voted down. No, we passed a different one.
We passed a different one, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the bottom line is the people voted. They said no, and they got it anyway.
Right.
And
well, and then you'll have, like, for example, I mean, how many times have there been sweeping elections to get rid of Obamacare? Still here. Like, how many times have there been elections to end the war in XYZ?
Yeah. Well, the Republicans don't want to end Obamacare because they're going to campaign on ending Obamacare for the next 50 years, and then they're going to talk about preserving it like they do Social Security and
exactly.
Medicare.
That's what I was just. I was just talking to someone about that. I said, if you look at the history, there's that famous speech from Ronald Reagan against Medicare and Medicaid, and they championed ending Medicare. Before that, they championed ending Social Security from like the 1940s until probably about the 1960s. They finally gave up on that. But then they were against Medicare and Medicaid, and they were going to end it and end it and end it. And then around the 80s, it became, we're going to preserve it for future generations. That's all that's going to happen with Obamacare. It's going to be, and it's going to be the same words. We're preserving it for our children. Why?
Conserving it.
We're conserving it. For our children. Yeah, we're
Well,
conservative, so we're conserving it.
Yeah, well, the conservatives never saw a liberal socialist scam that they didn't think that they could run better.
Literally, they just elected someone who didn't even talk about ending. He didn't even use the pretense of ending programs anymore. He just said, "I'm really good at running stuff. I'm going to run it better." So they've given up on that.
Yeah, it is a gun grabber too. I mean, bump stocks got legalized under Obama, and Trump wants them banned. Have they been banned yet?
Yeah, no, so there hasn't been a law, but the way it's written, supposedly the ATF basically changed the scheduling or ruling or whatever so that they just aren't allowed, or they won't be allowed soon or something like that. But Congress didn't have to even get involved, and Congress, who normally, imagine if Obama, without consulting Congress, moved to ban bump stocks. Republicans would be losing their minds, but because it's a Republican, it's okay. So there's definitely no dispute that voting for politicians is a pointless facade, and I definitely am with you there. I do wonder about the referendum thing, even if it's just that people see that they're not the only ones that are against it. But again, it's an issue of is it going to change anything? Probably not. It may just help someone see that they're not the only one out there that's against this thing.
Well, here's another story. One of my co-hosts on the Freedom Fiends, Michael Dean, every time there's an election, they have a referendum on a temporary sales tax, local sales tax for the library. Or, I don't know if it's a sales tax, but it's some sort of tax increase for the library. It's always supposed to last for like a couple of years or whatever.
Right.
And every time it gets voted down, and it keeps coming back. It keeps coming back every single election. If there's a special election, boom, here's your library tax. Vote on it. And they won't take no for an answer.
Right.
But here's the key thing. And maybe I'm being a bit of a purist here. The notion that your rights and money are subject to a vote are not an element of freedom. The fact that if you can get enough people to agree that you should keep your money, that's not freedom.
No, it's mob rule.
That's just luck of the draw. That's going into the casino and coming out with a few of your chips left.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't consider that to be freedom. As a matter of fact, they say, what if complete decriminalization of cannabis was on there, right, and the drug war? I'm not talking about legalize it, tax it, and regulate, because that's how it became illegal in the first place.
Right, exactly. Just completely get rid of it. Yeah.
It wasn't actually illegal when they first did the prohibition of cannabis. There was a tax stamp that you had to have to transport it. You had to transport it to get to the place to get the stamp. If you transport it without the stamp, then you got arrested. So they had a stamp that was impossible to get, and you got arrested for having it without the stamp. So even if you try to obey the law and get your tax stamp for it, if you took the cannabis to the tax stamp place, which you have to have it there to get your stamp, you were breaking the law and you went to jail. So just like they say shadow banning on Facebook and YouTube, right, you were shadow banned from having weed. Right.
And then later they changed the scheduling so that you can't use it for anything.
Well, that was just a straight up prohibition. But here's the thing. If you have a referendum, okay, and let's say you're a cannabis advocate or activist, whatever, and you want legal, and you go and it gets defeated by the margin required for it to be considered a defeat. Are you going to abide by the results of that election?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I've been sober for 12 years, so I wouldn't do it anyway. But yeah, what's that?
Well, lightweight.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's the thing.
Last time I smoked weed, Reagan was in office.
Oh wow.
So, but here's the thing: are these people going to abide by the results? Now, if your side wins, so let's say that you want it to be decriminalized and your side wins, do you expect the other side to abide by the results?
Right.
Because If you're gonna have it one way, you have to have it the other way. So if you agree to abide by the results of that vote, aren't you consenting to the criminalization if you can't get enough people to vote yes?
Oh, because why would you be upset if they're not complying if they lose, if you're also not going to comply if you lose?
Yeah, and incidentally, there is medical cannabis here in Michigan, and it's highly regulated, and the SWAT teams are still doing raids.
Oh, of course.
Now they're not so much enforcing prohibition, they're enforcing regulation. So when a SWAT team kicks in the door, one of them has a clipboard on his utility belt and checks off boxes on the sheet.
Right, yeah. So it's totally different now. Totally different.
Yeah, and they're harassing the providers and the caregivers, and a lot of them are going to jail. Matter of fact, there's a lot of times where they're doing raids and nobody's getting arrested and there's no charges. Right. They're just harassing them. Right. So here's the thing, I believe that came about by the will of the people. LOL. I do believe that came from a vote. But anyway, here you have something that's been legalized, but people are still being harassed. So when you have the people saying, "Well, we have to vote for freedom," you're not voting for freedom. You're voting for permission. Yeah, because if enough people can vote to take your freedom away, it's not freedom. It's permission. That's all it is.
Yeah. I certainly agree with you there. I find it interesting. You were mentioning before about Facebook, telling people to, register to vote. I'm in my 30s.
That was spam.
That was spam. Report it. I'm going to report this as hate speech.
State speech is hate speech.
No, absolutely. I'm in my 30s.
Go ahead. If you're going to talk about voting, do it in the unfree speech zone.
Exactly. So I'm in my 30s. It took me about 15 years to step back and say, there's a pattern to this, and I don't think anything good is coming from this. I see people that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 80s, whatever, and they're still saying stuff like, this is the most important election in our lifetimes. And whenever I see stuff like that,
the last most important election of our lifetimes, and until
2 years ago, until
the next most important one.
And I'll ask them, I'll say, when was an election that wasn't the most important election in our lifetimes? And they'll often say, well, it wasn't. It's always the most important. Well, then A, stop saying that, because clearly it's always the most important thing ever. And B, you're living in crisis mode, and there's no way you can truly be happy in life if you're really if it's not just political rhetoric and a lie that you're telling me and yourself. If you truly believe that every 2 years it becomes that much more crucial that you go into this ballot box to vote, or else we're all going to die or whatever you think is going to happen, then there's no way you're truly enjoying life, because you're living year to year in an increasing level of crisis mode. And I'm not going to live that way. Even if I agreed with you, I wouldn't live that way.
Most people do not have any thought out, grounded beliefs.
Right.
It's like the person that says, well, I vote for the party because my daddy voted for that party and his daddy voted for that party.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so what is it about that party that you care about? How do they appeal to you? And they might actually disagree with that party, but they're doing it out of tradition. Have you ever heard the story of the young mother cutting the end off of the ham?
Maybe. I don't believe so.
Okay.
No. I'm Jewish. We don't talk about ham.
Okay. Well, put some latex gloves on as I talk about this.
Okay.
So, we'll get to you in a minute, Pamela. She's got a question on there.
Yeah,
so,
I was gonna bring that up in a second, but go ahead.
So, my answer is I wish the voting polls were closed everywhere.
That's pretty much all I was gonna say. Is it's a good start. Close the rest of them too.
All right.
Go ahead.
So anyway, this young mother is preparing a ham for dinner. She's got it in the baking dish and she's about to put it in the oven. But first, she cuts the end off of it and puts the end in the baking dish. And her little girl is watching her, and she's like, Mom, why did you cut the end off of the ham before you put it in the oven? She says, well, I don't know. It's because my mother always did it that way. And the little girl kept badgering her, and she's like, well, it's not a real answer. So the young mother calls her mother and says, the lesser of two evils, it's still evil. That's from Stephen. So anyway, the young mother calls her mother and says, "Hey, your granddaughter's asking why I cut the end off of the ham, and I told her that you do it. So why do you do it?" And she says, "Well, I cut the end off because my mother did it too." And they're like, "So you don't have like a real answer as to does it make things taste better? Does it make it juicier, drier? Why is this happening?" And it's only because each previous mother had done it. So they get the great grandmother on the three-way calling, because it's the modern age and cell phones, and say, "Hey, we got this big question. This tradition, this family thing has been going on for the longest time. Why did you cut the end off of the ham and put it in the baking dish before you put it in the oven? Because we've been doing it too." And the great grandmother says, "Oh, that's easy. I didn't have a baking dish big enough to hold the whole ham." So here you have this tradition, dare I even say ritual.
Right.
And
that they never questioned, because that's how it was always done. Right.
Yeah. So I mentioned the Overton window earlier. There are people out there that they have this. I like Tom Woods' 3x5 card a lot better. There's the 3x5 card of allowable opinion, where when you're talking about tax rates, the top tax rate can be 34% or 36%. Once you start talking about 37, you're a big government liberal socialist. Once you start talking about 33%, then you're an anarchist Republican that wants Social Security to end right there.
Right. So if someone comes in talking about why we even have taxes, you're attacking people's belief systems. Like it's just as bad as you saying there isn't a God or something like that to them, because you're actually attaching. They have this core belief that they don't even know why they have it. That, well, of course taxes have to be somewhere in the 30% range. Well, why? Well, why don't you move to Somalia? That you're attacking their belief system that they don't even know why they have it. And like you said, it's a ritual. It is ritual.
It's as ridiculous as saying, look, if we don't have Negroes out in the field, how's this cotton going to get picked?
Yeah, exactly.
What are you telling me, that there's going to be some machine that goes through there and pulls the cotton out of the plants and processes it? What are you, crazy?
You fool! Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and there are just only so many options. It's like I don't know a whole lot about computer programming, but when you're writing code. Okay, so let's say you don't get the code just right, but you keep writing the same code, putting it in the same way every single time. The true definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome.
Right.
And if you only have so many options that you allow yourself, and like I said earlier, with the social media stuff, the politicians and the power brokers, the power elite out there, they don't mind when you argue about Coke versus Pepsi, Republican versus Democrat, just as long as you don't start talking about not drinking soda anymore.
Right.
Now, once you start talking about drinking water or something healthy, oh no, absolutely not. You can't have that. That's outside of the 3x5 card of allowable opinion. And the politically minded people fall in this category themselves. You can explain to them how you have an election, and you can show all these different examples of when how you had an election, how people voted really hard, and they got some referendum knocked down, and boom, it winds up coming back. It gets passed some other way. I mean, that the gas tax increase was probably a little bit more blatant of an example than most cases, but nevertheless, it happened. So, and you can show them all these different things, and you can logically destroy the notion of voting for freedom, and you can get them to. And you can use the Socratic method and get them to the point of understanding and answering all these questions. And you can finally get them to say, voting is not going to give us freedom. We have to quit doing this way. We have to do something different. And then right after you get them to say that, you say, so what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to get my name on the ballot. I'm going to run for office. I'm going to change the system from the inside.
Yep.
Yeah. If you want to change the system from the inside, you better be Mexican water. So, because what happens is, because they only have these options here, they only have these ideas that the only way to do it is through political activity. And quite frankly, I think non-political activity will be a whole lot better. As I said, what was the campaign that was used against MySpace and BlackBerry?
Right.
There wasn't one.
There wasn't one, yeah.
It was a spontaneous order of the market. And if you look at the greatest social changes that have happened out there, do you think that slavery would have ended if slaves were not escaping, if there wasn't an underground railroad to shepherd them out of there?
Oh no, and not so. That's the active self-defensive resistance to it. You also
Yes.
had market forces like the cotton gin, later on, and then you had low-cost immigrant labor coming in from Europe, which in many cases, not necessarily in the South, but in the North at least, it was actually more affordable to just hire someone to do something than to try to own them and basically meet all their needs and be responsible for their body when they die and their children and all of that. It actually was less affordable. It was actually more affordable to just hire someone outright, and they were eager to do the work, so they worked more efficiently because they weren't just working enough to not be killed or punished. They were working because they wanted to keep their job and keep their money. So there were market forces at play there too, which if those things weren't in place, there wouldn't have been any appetite to elect people to end slavery and all of that to begin with. So I mean, it's voting patterns always trail behind cultural and economic patterns that make actual changes.
Government is always a lagging indicator.
Yeah,
But here's something else. Do you think that segregation would have ended if Rosa Parks had set her butt in the back of the bus like she was supposed to? No, it
in that
wouldn't
time,
have.
no. In that time, no.
That was a catalyst. What was
Right.
it that Frederick Douglass said, that you can't expect change without some agitation? I know I absolutely butchered it, but
Right.
that's the gist behind it. And let's go a little bit further. Let's go with Harriet Tubman and one of her famous quotes. And there's some dispute as to whether she said this or not, but I agree with the sentiment. The path to freedom isn't always a legal one.
Right. Right. Well, I had that conversation with someone today. They were telling me they're, the typical thing. We're not against immigration. We're just against illegal immigration. And I said,
Yeah, and
go ahead.
Nancy Pelosi's not against gun ownership. She's just against illegal gun
illegal
ownership.
gun ownership.
And how does something become illegal? A bunch of idiot politicians get together and they scribble some words down on paper and make an edict.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Yeah.
people say, but the gun ownership is a constitutional right. Well, here's the thing about constitutional rights. They're words on paper.
Yeah.
They're amendments. Constitutions could be amended. So if they go through the amendment process and repeal the Second Amendment, and they do it according to all the bureaucracy that's required,
Yep.
then what? Then what? Are you going to say, well, you best turn in your guns and obey the law?
You lost
Well,
your
quite
amendment. You lost your amendment.
Yeah, quite frankly, a lot of them will do that. Well, you'll be able to keep your amendment. You'll just have to turn in your guns, which is how it's going.
Exactly. And so they brought this up, and my thing was, I said, hey, look, during the time of chattel slavery, it was completely illegal to leave your owner. There were fugitive slave acts. It was against federal law. If they found you, they would bring you back to your master, would probably kill you to make an example out of you to the other slaves. Would you have supported that punishment? And they went apoplectic, and they were saying, you just hate order, and I bet when your mother told you what to do, did you listen or not? I mean, you just went on this rant, and I didn't respond to any of what she said, and all I responded with was saying, I wrote to the people that were reading this, I said, you'll all notice that she didn't ever even think to address what I just said, because it would force her to reconcile the evil that is inherent in what she is saying, that just because something is legal, that in and of itself is a reason not to do something. And if I felt like it, I could have gone further and said, so then this person would be perfectly fine with murdering people if it wasn't against the law. They'd be perfectly fine with rape if it wasn't against the law, because to them, the only concern is whether or not, like you said, idiot politicians got together and wrote on a sheet of paper that it was okay to do it or not.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, here's another one. Did you know that prohibition of alcohol was repealed at the state level in 10 states before it was repealed at the federal level? One of
would
those
not avoid that. No.
one of those states being New Yorkistan, the Empire State.
Oh, wow. And I assume the federal government didn't respect that, or did they respect those repealings, or?
I don't know all the details. I would imagine that they didn't. But what happened was, because so many people were consuming alcohol during Prohibition, as I mentioned earlier in the show, because everything has to come back in a circle.
Right.
After a couple of years, more people were consuming alcohol than before Prohibition.
Right.
And there were more alcohol-related problems like injuries, domestic violence, all the different things that were supposed to go away with Prohibition.
Right, all the reasons they were against it in the first place.
Yeah, there was more alcohol poisoning than before Prohibition. You had more gangland rubouts during Prohibition than before. As a matter of fact, I don't think you had any gangland rubouts for fighting for territory. But anyway, what happened was, because so many people were violating the law, it was unenforceable. I mean, what are you going to do? Arrest everybody?
Right.
And then here's
including
the
police. Everyone was. I mean, everyone was drinking.
Yeah. Now here's the best part. When these cases were going to trial, people were voting not guilty. They couldn't buy a conviction. You had all these people saying, you know what, we see this law, but it's a stupid law, and we're gonna, we're not gonna do what you say. We're gonna be a check on government power versus a rubber stamp.
Right.
Because
jury nullification. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had jury nullification, which, by the way, was used to circumvent the fugitive slave laws in the century before that.
Yep.
But you had all these people saying, we're not going to do this. And I used to have a really good line to explain this. This is, the fact that they could nullify was to say that the people were the rightful power of government, or the rightful master of government, instead of the other way around. And when you say that, sometimes the conservatives will get really, really cranky, especially when you're talking about gun rights. And I got a little story that we'll go into in a minute. But anyway, so they couldn't get a conviction. So they could go out and they could arrest all these people. They could go to court, and all they're doing is getting practice. They're wasting money. Well, they don't really care about wasting money, but they're not getting any results out of their money. And even better, they're being made to look like chumps, like fools, like little B words. All right, they're just getting their butts handed to them. So they had no choice but to surrender. Yes, the government surrendered in those 10 states. And then, after seeing the trend, seeing what was going on, and then chasing the trend, FDR campaigned as the wet candidate, because he knew that he couldn't keep the war on alcohol going.
Yeah, exactly.
He knew it was a losing proposition. So the prohibition of alcohol wasn't repealed because of freedoms and all of the other stuff. Right. It was an acknowledgement of defeat. It was a graceful surrender. And of course, they try to look at their defeat and call it a victory. Right.
Well, it was a pure failure. It was a demonstrable failure that you were not going to change society by saying no. And we're seeing it now with drug prohibition. It's the exact same cannabis. Thing. Cannabis, heroin, all of it. Like, I mean, heroin's not good. I am not a pro heroin advocate. I'm not. Marijuana is something that, it's less harmful than alcohol. There's potential medicinal benefits to it and all of that stuff. Heroin is something that's bad for you. You shouldn't do heroin. But it gets made worse by creating a black market and putting people in cages for doing heroin.
Well, the hard drugs are a result of the iron law of prohibition.
Right.
Mark Thornton of the Mises Institute has written a book. I believe it's when he was at Cato he wrote this book. And he talks about the consequences of prohibition. A lot of people look at the things that go on with the illicit drug markets today, and they blame the drugs. Right. But the reality is that this stuff is a result of the prohibition and not the drugs. For as horrible as those drugs are, the worst problem of the drug use pales in comparison to the mildest problem caused by prohibition.
Exactly.
So what you have is why are there all these hard drugs out there? It's not that there's really a strong market for it. When you talk to a lot of pot smokers, one of the biggest complaints out there is that you can't find dirt weed anymore. The only
Right.
thing that you can find is this super powered,
Yeah.
say goodbye to your family and friends because you're losing your mind for a couple days
Right,
type
right.
stuff.
Right.
The dirt weed that I grew up on doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist anymore.
And the reason is, and you saw this during the prohibition of alcohol, and you see it now with cannabis, you can charge a lot more money for higher potency product. With whiskey is much more powerful as far as alcohol content than beer. Now, if you have the same amount of risk of running a truckload of beer and a truckload of whiskey, but you
Which
can
one are you gonna
charge
do?
four times as much for the whiskey,
Right.
that's a no-brainer. You're going to bring whiskey in.
Right.
So instead of having a bunch of people with beer guts that weren't drinking as much actual alcohol,
Right.
you have people that are drinking hard liquor,
Right.
and you have a lot of the stuff that's going, you have the alcohol related illnesses, the cirrhosis of the liver, pancreatitis, all these different things. You have much higher frequencies than you had before. Now you also have with the weed, if you get the same risk from running 20 kilos of weed as what are you going to do? Are you going to have the superpower stuff that you could charge 4 times as much?
Right.
Or the low cost stuff? It's a no brainer. It creates an incentive to have more powerful product out there.
Or 20 kilos of heroin instead of, if the risk is the same, why wouldn't you do whatever can make you the most money?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, the more powerful it is, also the more that you can cut it. As a matter of fact, do you know where brandy came from? Brandy is just a really strong wine. What happened was they were making up this, they were making this super potent stuff because of the tax on the barrel of wine. It was really high tax. So they were still paying the taxes, but they were making this super powered stuff, running across the border and then diluting it and then selling it at regular, at regular price.
Okay.
But it turned out that there was actually a taste for the brandy, and so that they kept doing it that way. But that's something that's been done to circumvent the intervention. In that case, the intervention is taxation. In the case of yes, Jacob, people still smoke the weeds, or maybe they inject it. I don't know, or maybe they put it in their eye and get high from that way.
Yeah, they inject
It's
the
been a long
marijuanas
time
in
for
their
me.
eyeballs now. It's very sad. It's terrible.
Yeah, they're taking the weeds. But here's the thing. So you have this much more powerful stuff that's out there. You also had people that were making their own alcohol at home. The old bathtub gin.
Right.
When you look at a lot of the drugs that are out there, like the meth, I mean, that's just pure crap in there. And meth has been around for a long time, but it's only been popular since, even slightly popular since the 70s.
Yeah. I know it exploded because when I was in school, they were told us about it, and it exploded in like the mid to late 90s, and then again a few years ago, and then it was replaced again by heroin. And it's all related to which one you can get cheaper ultimately. But it's
Thank you. You just brought up a great point. Cannabis is not a gateway to heroin. Cannabis seizures are a gateway to heroin.
Yeah.
I was in the I've talked about this enough publicly that it's not a big secret. I was homeless a number of years ago.
Okay.
And I was in a VA homeless treatment program. So it was homelessness and mental health and everything else.
Okay.
And I really learned a lot, and this pushed me towards libertarianism too. One of the things I found out is the people that wound up going from weed to like crack and heroin and all that sort of stuff. And I talked to a lot of people on this. They were going through whatever it was that they needed to self-medicate with the cannabis.
Right.
And there were many of them that, because there was a drug bust in the area and weed dried up, or there was just a shortage, but they still needed to self-medicate, they weren't looking to smoke crack, but they went to the dealer and they're like, yeah, it's what I got.
Right.
Give it a shot.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, they're crackheads.
Yeah. When I was doing drugs, it was the same thing. Now I was thankfully I was smart enough to stay away from, well, a couple times. For the most part, I stayed away from cocaine products. I never got involved in any of the heroin products. I did some pills, but I was not big. My big thing was weed and alcohol. The only times I did any cocaine was when we couldn't get any weed. And well, there was that one time that we did both. But most of the time, it was when you couldn't get what you actually wanted. And for me, when they would say, well, no, I've got crack or whatever, it was like, nah, I'll just be, strung out for the next couple of days. And I'm not going to, I've seen crackheads. I don't want to get into that. But some of my friends did. They would get into that. And so, I mean, it's true. It's if you dry up the supply, you can tell a Jew they can't have pork, but if they go to the store and there's no beef, there's no chicken, there's no bread, there's no lettuce, there's no cabbage, there's no anything else, all that's there is pork. Now what? So I mean, if you have someone that has an addiction issue and or is self-medicating because of mental health issues or chronic pain issues, because then there's the other issue of people who get into illegal drugs in the first place because their doctor isn't allowed to prescribe them the pain meds they need for chronic pain. So, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff there that when government gets involved and tells you you can't do something, then you end up going into a black market with people who don't give a crap about you, but they'll sell you whatever you need, and now you're buying, you're buying meth, heroin, black tar heroin, crack, whatever else. So, no, it's absolutely a gateway to that.
Yeah, drug busts are a gateway to hard drugs or cannabis
absolutely.
Confiscations and shortages. So, yeah, is there anything else to cover on that? Do you think we nailed everything?
I think we're pretty good. I mean, the next thing I was going to bring up was, and it was something you wanted to talk about, was the parallels between the so-called left and the so-called right, basically all the different flavors of authoritarians.
Well, there is something that I do want to add to it.
Okay.
Going back to the previous thing, I think that if there was decriminalization of all drugs, I think that meth would pretty much disappear.
Yeah.
There's still people that would do it. It would not be as popular as it is. It became popular in the 70s because of interventions. And there was a time when nobody wanted meth, but when you get to a point that that's all that was available.
That's all that was available,
yeah,
right?
I still think that there would be some hallucinogens. I do believe that the designer club drugs would be there. I think they'd be a lot safer because they'd probably be made in labs instead of people's houses or their sheds.
Yeah.
So I do think those problems would go away. But let's go back to the war on alcohol. Okay. The war on how long did the war on alcohol last? That was probably it was well over 10 years, probably 15, something
like that. Yeah, I know it was. I think it was at or around a decade.
Yeah. And it was over a decade. I think it went from 1917 to 32, something like that. Does that sound about right?
Quickly, yeah. I'm looking it up because I'm curious. But yeah, it was at least 10 years. Yeah.
Okay, and every year it escalated. It got stronger, right?
Right. Yeah.
Just like the war on drugs has gotten stronger.
Yep.
And you had gun control. The first non-racist gun control legislation came about because of the gang violence, the gangland rubouts of prohibition. The gangsters, the syndicates trying to take each other out to get territory. So
exactly. Well, and you're taking people that they'll murder, they'll do whatever for money, and you're giving them a new market. So you're giving them more money. You're giving them, you're essentially handing them money, and of course they're going to kill each other. Yeah.
You're incentivizing violence. There are people out there that would kill you for $1, but they won't kill you for 50 cents.
Right.
And by making the profit from the drug or alcohol trade $1, you've just incentivized them to kill to maintain current territory and obtain new territory.
Exactly.
So you have gun control legislation coming about as a response to the problems caused by prohibition. So government is looking at a problem and completely misdiagnosing the cause of it.
Right, exactly. Right? Yeah, and it was from 1920 to 1933. It was a 13-year thing.
Okay. Now, for all of you political crusaders out there to say, we can get the right people in there. We can get somebody like Calvin Coolidge.
Right.
When was Calvin Coolidge the president? In the late 1920s?
Yep.
Hey, Calvin Coolidge, the alcohol warrior, the president that prosecuted the war on alcohol, Mr. Small Government guy. Oh, by the way, that gun control legislation that I was talking about, 1927. Who was president at that time?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you remember in 2012 when everybody was talking about how Ron Paul was going to become president and he was going to end the Fed, and how the 100-year Fed charter was going to be up in 2013, and they'd have to justify their existence. You remember how that died out when they found out that the Fed charter was made permanent in 1926?
I remember hearing about that, and then it just kind of went away. But I assumed it was bogus when I first heard it. I was like,
who was the president in 1926?
Coolidge.
Mr. Do Nothing, Calvin Coolidge.
No.
So this notion that you're going to get the right people into office and they're going to reform things. Yeah, they did reform some things. There was less spending, and there was also less taxes were lowered, but government still grew. It's kind of like having the balloon. Imagine the long balloon, and it's blown up, it's tied off at one end, and I'm going to squeeze the balloon. And I'm say, look how I'm shrinking government. Where did the air go? It went to another part. Because that's what happens when you use politics to shrink government. You get gun control, you get a permanent Fed charter, and you get a war on alcohol by Mr. Laissez-faire. Right. And then to top it off, you get Hoover, that winds up being the next president, who was the architect of most of the FDR's New Deal programs. Right. FDR didn't come up with most of that stuff. That was Hoover's doing. Another one that's wrongly attributed as laissez-faire. And then, of course, you get Red DR, followed by Truman, Kennedy, Johnson, and just every list of communists that have gone down the line. So this whole notion that you're going to this whole notion that you're going to get all these people in there. Oh, and the other thing, and libertarians should hate Coolidge for this. There was this bill in 26 or 27. I can't remember. I can't remember what it's called. It was kind of like a numbering act. And what that did was it started the nationalization of roads. The federal government was not very active in roads until after that particular act. And I wish I could remember what it was called. But under Coolidge, FDR got very involved in the roads. Interestingly enough, because the government was so lousy at doing roads and infrastructure and everything else, and it was usually just such a boondoggle, private companies were laying miles and miles of road when government was laying feet and feet of road. Right, yeah. And by, I want to say it was 1858 or 1853, I can't remember exactly, all but 2 state constitutions have prohibited public funding of infrastructure projects because of all the corruption and incompetence involved in it. Yeah. So now you have the government getting back involved under Coolidge.
Yeah, I remember hearing, and I think it was around this time or maybe earlier, there's a lake in Louisiana, and government had failed to build a bridge I think it was a lake. It was either a lake or a river. And anyway, so a guy ended up building a toll bridge, and it was very popular because it was the easiest way to get from whatever city to whatever other city, somewhere in Louisiana. And what government ended up doing was they started taxing that bridge, and they used the money to build another bridge that they let people go over for free. And it obviously, once they built it, there was no point to using this guy's bridge anymore. And so he, ended up becoming penniless or going out of business or whatever. And once he wasn't able to pay the taxes anymore, they took that bridge. Now there's 2 bridges there, or at least there were at the time. And government choked out their competition, and there was nothing he could do about it. He had to pay the taxes.
Yeah, they made the users of the other bridge pay for the new bridge and said, "Look what we did for you. Look what we're
Exactly. We
giving
gave you
you."
a free bridge. Yeah, exactly. And people believed in it.
It's
So
like raping somebody and then saying, "Look, I gave you a child."
right, exactly. Or yeah, you rape them and someone else isn't being raped, and you go, I'm saving you from rape or whatever.
We have
So,
a question from a viewer.
oh,
Hey
do we?
Lou, remember the conversation we had about basically having no government and how people would be punished for things like murder or rape? How do you guys think a society without government could hand out punishment for said crimes without force? I'm not arguing the point. I just don't have a good answer. Vigilante? Do you think that would be right? Well, what's the difference between the actual victim seeking justice with people from the neighborhood versus the so-called disinterested third party? Isn't government, police, and courts a vigilante, aside from the belief that they're not?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, and I can't speak for anyone else. I don't ever say that force or violence or whatever physical force should never be used. I mean, obviously in defense or as a an act of retribution to prevent something like that from happening again. Of course, you're going to have that. I don't believe in a hippie utopia that I mean it'd be great if we could, but I don't want to hurt anyone. But I don't think it's feasible to say that no one's ever going to hurt anyone, and that if someone hurts you, you should never do anything to them. I definitely believe in the idea of punishing people if they harm someone else's whether it's their life or their property or their body or whatever else. If you don't have those boundaries and you don't have something in place that says that if you do X, Y, if you do this, something's going to happen to you, or if you try to do this and we'll try to stop you. There's nothing wrong with that. Where the breakdown happens is having it in a forced association. So if I live in my home and someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, we're going to protect you, and we created this system, this legal system, whatever you want to call it, that if someone hurts you, they're going to get punished, and we'll protect you, and it only cost you X a month," and I go, "Yeah, it's a good idea. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that." If they come and they say it's this much a month, and I say, "Yeah, I think I got it. I have it taken care of, or I have this other service and I'm good." And they go, no, this isn't optional. You're going to pay us this, and we're going to protect you. That's the breakdown. That's when it's now a state or a monopoly, where you're forcing the person to be associated with this in the first place. That's the breakdown. Not that someone who's committing murder is after the fact being rounded up and stopped either by the victims, loved ones, or by just an organization that has been put together to do these types of things. The problem is when there's forced association with that entity.
There's so much stuff that could be said on the subject. I'm just going to give my brief little overview on it, and this is where I tend to lean. I'm not going to say that I'm hard and fast and set in stone on this, but a way to look at this, as I mentioned, government is just a vigilante of its own. It just calls itself something.
Right.
But here's what you have to look at. If you have a murder or a rape, and those are the two examples that were given there.
Right.
You have a clearly defined victim. So in a rape, you have the person that was raped. In a murder, you have the person that was murdered, and then you also have, like, let's say, the family members of the person that was murdered. If a man is married and he's murdered, well, his wife and children that he may have are also victims of this.
Right.
His parents are, but with the wife and kids, you could clearly say, okay, well, there's a financial loss that's there. Instead of looking at a murder or a rape as a crime against society, how about looking at it as a violation against the actual victim?
Exactly.
You always hear this: pay your debt to society. Well, no, I didn't murder society. I murdered Spike because he wouldn't share his ham with me. He's not really Jewish. But
you still can't have it. Just because I can't have it doesn't mean you can have it too.
Yeah. But anyway,
it's still mine.
When you look at it differently, and there was an article by, I can't remember if Clarence Darrow wrote it or it was about him, but the notion was, if you get robbed, if you get mugged, you're better off not calling the cops at all and having it investigated, because one, you lost your money, you're not going to get it back, and then when then you have to pay part of the court costs to get the person convicted, and then you have to pay part of the cost to keep them incarcerated for all these years.
Right.
So you're going to wind up, if they go to trial and go to jail, you wind up losing more than you would have lost had you just cut your losses at being mugged.
Right. And learned your lesson and changed your routine or gotten a gun or do whatever you do to stop it from happening again.
So the robber situation is really simple. The way I see it, the robber owes restitution to the actual victim.
Yep.
Meaning, if I steal $100 from you, I have to give you $100. If you were to hire a company to do the investigation, and quite frankly, you wouldn't hire somebody over $100. There'd probably be small claims court or something like that.
Exactly.
But anyway, there would be dispute resolution out there. But if you look at these things as a dispute versus a crime against society,
right,
that's a better way to handle these things, in my opinion. Right. So I think that in the case of a robbery, I'd owe you $100. I'd owe you the restitution for the trial, and I would probably owe you a little something extra for your trouble. Call it an a-hole tax.
Right. And obviously force is involved, because if you rob me and these people come and say, well, you owe them $100, that's not optional. So yes, force is involved there, but the reason force is involved is as a restitutional thing to resolve the initial encroachment that you made against me by robbing me. It's not you aren't being harmed because you're an innocent victim. You're having restitution, whatever. You're having an act of restitution in the form of force used because of what you did. So it's not it's that's different from a state. That's actual justice. When we talk about justice, that's actual justice. That is something happened, and so something is happening to resolve that, so to bring it back as close to before that as possible.
Yeah. In a robbery, you can make the victim whole again.
Right,
or
exactly.
It's more possible. In a murder, you can't bring the dead person back.
Exactly.
And killing the other person, it may satisfy a lust for vengeance. And I'm not completely opposed to retribution either.
Right.
But you can't make the victim whole in that regard.
You definitely can't. Yeah.
And you can have punishment in there, but there's something else. I believe this even goes to the Bible. There were areas that people would be exiled to where they would be outlaws. And the original meaning of the word outlaw was you were outside the protection of the law.
Right.
And they could go to these places, these sanctuaries for scumbags, and so long as they stayed there, they were safe.
There was no problem.
But the moment they left there, then boom.
Yeah. So that was their choice to make. So that would be my answer to that. I think sometimes people, and I'm maybe not necessarily Steve, but there are people that when they hear no government, they think that means no justice, no rules at all, no standards or boundaries or anything else. It's just a bunch of people running around like in Mad Max or something like that, and it's not. There's still going to be order. We as individuals still want safety, stability, commerce. We want good relations with people around us, if at all possible. We want to be able to get from point A to point B. We still want infrastructure. We still want all of the creature comforts that we enjoy today. We're not anarcho-primitivists. We don't want to go and go into the trees and eat berries. Which if you do, that's fine. But I don't. And
I like berries.
I love berries. I'm not built to climb trees anymore.
You have, neither am I. But with me, it's just old and fat. But anyway,
right.
You've just brought up a very important point. The notion that things that people want would not exist without government is absolutely asinine, because people want cannabis right now and they're not even allowed to have it. And there are people out there that are willing to provide it, just like people want to eat. Well, there's people that are willing to provide food. People want cars. There are people that are willing to build cars and sell them.
Right.
That's the whole thing of the market, and this is where governments absolutely fail. They cannot compete with the market. And this goes back to what I said earlier. There is no natural monopoly. And the only way that you can become wealthy in the market is by satisfying the needs of your customers,
Exactly.
satisfying their wants and desires. So
Right.
if you want justice, there will be a market for justice and people
course.
will provide it.
Yep.
There won't be any government cops and law enforcers, but there will be security and protection, because if you want security and protection and you're willing to pay somebody to provide it, somebody will provide it to you.
Of course.
And
There's
if
always there's a market for it. Exactly.
And if you can't afford it, they'll find a way to get you a better deal.
Yep. Yep.
Exactly. They'll find a smaller package, or a competitor will come in there and say, "Hey, we can provide this service at a lower cost." Pamela has a question there. It says, if somebody harmed her child, that she actually needed to get sure justice. I think she's looking at.
Yeah.
So, assure that they are punished. So, here's a way of looking at this. One, I do think that there will be a lot less of these different things. You would not have the incentive for crimes. You could probably calculate an awful lot of the murders out there to the drug trade and things that go along with the drug trade.
Right.
So when you eliminate these disincentives to good behavior, and you get down to the raw number of murders and stuff, murder's not gonna go away. There's not going to be some kind of unicorn utopia. You're going to have crimes of passion where somebody becomes so emotionally overwrought over a cheating spouse or something of that nature. You'll have those crimes of passion. You will have mental and social defects like serial killers. Those are still going to exist.
Yeah.
But when you take away the incentives to bad behavior, the looting and pillaging, the stuff that goes along with that, you're going to get down to the base number of murders. Okay? Murder's not going away. Nobody's claiming that it will. It will just be greatly reduced. It's like when I talk about how many gangland rubouts did you have over the alcohol trade before or after Prohibition? What did the drug cartels look like before drug prohibition? They didn't. They didn't exist. So you can eliminate a lot of that stuff. You can eliminate a lot of the robberies. Because in a truly free market, things are going to be a lot more affordable. You're not going to have crappy money that loses value all the time.
Exactly.
And it really my argument for anarchy is it eliminates the incentive for bad behavior, which most people are just absolutely convinced. It's like I was talking about earlier, because everything has to go in a circle. People have this Overton window and this belief system of this is the only way that things can work. The only way that we can have these flat, hard surfaces that automobiles go on is by having government extort people. There's no way that a man could build a bridge and charge people $1 to go across it.
Exactly.
On his own. So now with I think that there would be a lot less of these crimes. Now there's something else that would go on there. Not only would crimes not be incentivized, but there would also be a disincentive of it. Let's say it was an absolute positive lawless society, no laws whatsoever. What do you think would happen to you if you killed somebody, particularly somebody that was liked in the community, particularly somebody that had a family? It's quite possible that the family out there would take you down. Or it's quite possible that somebody in the community might look at this wrong and say, you know what, something needs to be done about this.
Exactly.
I happen to be one of those people that can do it. I saw a headline recently here in Michigan, but down in Macomb County, down in the southeastern corner. It says police baffled, third pedophile found murdered.
I saw
in X amount of time. The trash gets taken out. Now, I don't guarantee that there would be a perfect system, and I don't know, Pamela, that you would get the justice that you believe is right. But I do believe that if somebody behaved in such a heinous behavior, that the community standards would have their page taken down. so to speak, because
Get
everything is.
deplatformed.
Yeah, yeah. I think if a person raped somebody, they would get deplatformed and their page and ass would get deleted.
Yeah, yeah. I agree, and it's, again, we want order, we want stability, we want, we're not advocating for, a murder rich society. Like Lou said, a lot of that stuff's going to go away because here's another thing to talk about. There are a lot of people that are, they're thieves, they're rapists, they're murderers, whatever, because they have been raised on a concept of entitlement by virtue of their very birth. That wouldn't exist in a free market society. You have entire generations of people who've never actually worked a day in their lives. They are existing on government largesse, and basically they're getting that in exchange for their vote to continue it. And they have an entitlement mentality that doesn't just end with welfare, housing, whatever they're getting. It continues to, I want that thing you have, and because I exist, no one's ever told me that I can't have stuff just because I exist. I've been told just the opposite. So now I want that thing, I take it from you. And which is why you have such high crime in areas with such high poverty, because a lot of the time, a lot of the people that are there have been taught, they've been taught nothing but, well, everything, you can have what you want because you exist. So that would go away as well, that entitlement mentality.
Well, let's take it a step further. They are incentivized to do bad things, but there are also people, the good people out there, the Pamelas, and I presume Steve, who
Right.
They're good people, and maybe they want to follow the law. They don't want to get in trouble.
Right.
But when we look at the criminalization of self-defense over the past few decades, it used to be to where if somebody broke into your house, then, yeah, you'd have to call the cops and do a report, but you could call the carcass removal service and have them taken out rather quickly.
Right,
Oh, by the way,
right.
Steve, we're not going into speeding laws, maybe on another show. But these days, if you defend your property, particularly property, not so much life, but if you defend your property, you can wind up doing more time than the burglar that robs you.
Exactly.
Think about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You can get more time. You can get punished more severely for defending your property than the thief that was stealing it.
Yep.
So I hate to use this term law-abiding citizen because I think of that as obedient slave, but for the person that wants to conform to society and do what they believe to be the right thing.
Or just not harm others, just,
Yeah.
a non-violent person. Right, right.
Yeah. To me, violence is hardly ever the first answer.
Of course.
I know, unless of course you come in my home and I don't know who the heck you are.
Right,
In that case, violence is the first, second, and third answer.
right.
But I personally would rather solve problems non-violently, peacefully, intellectually, whatever. But I'm not a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination.
Right,
I am
right.
not. I am not a pacifist.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of libertarians out there that are. I don't believe in initiating aggression.
Yep.
I believe in finishing it, though.
Right, right. Absolutely. I'm with you there, and I'm not. There are a lot of, like you said, libertarians that are like, well, violence is bad, and it's like, well, it depends on the violence. I mean, what are we talking about? Violence to harm someone because you want their stuff, or are we talking about violence against that guy? Because if we're talking about violence against that guy, I'm all for that kind of violence. I'm for that violence every day of the week.
Yeah. So I hope that answers your question, Pamela.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's satisfactory. I hear we're supposed to be making fun of SJWs and CJWs. So let's get to that.
Yeah, yeah. So most people in the world, but especially in the, let's say in the U.S., they have this idea that, again, talking about the Overton window or the 3x5 card of a flashcard of allowable opinion, that the poles of political opinion are Democrats and Republicans. That's the you're either a Democrat or a Republican or a centrist, you're a moderate, somewhere in between, which is so. I mean, that there's, if you look at an actual spectrum of politics, Democrats and Republicans occupy such a small part of that spectrum, and they're so close together. And so and there's, even if you don't know about all the different political belief systems and ideologies and so forth, just looking at their behaviors tells you that there's not much of a difference. So, you've got your political correctness on the left, and you've got your patriotic correctness on the right. They're both triggered by you saying stuff that, that they don't like, and they want the government to harm you for it. And you've got, social justice and cultural justice, and it's the same thing.
Before you steal my thunder anymore,
okay.
I want to read from an article here.
Okay.
And this is from the Washington Post, and it's an older article, December 7th, 2016. The right has its own version of political correctness. It's just as stifling. And it goes on to talk about how annoying leftists are, and they are, and they're absolutely horrible.
Right.
It's with all the did you just assume my gender, and did you just assume this, and
right.
and there's 600 different genders, and God only knows how many gender pay gaps to go along with that. But just all the political correctness crap that goes out there. It's I get the idea every once in a while that these people aren't real. They're just trolling to see how much they can get away with and how many people are going to take the bait. But anyway, this article here.
But then they just keep going, and
So in this article here, they're talking about that. It starts off: President-elect Donald Trump has not been shy about the big problem in this country: political correctness. Trump has blamed PC for the attack at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. They have put political correctness over common sense, above your safety and above all else, he tweeted. And the rise of the militant group Islamic State. His voters agreed. Indeed, it might have even been the reason for his victory. And we're going to touch on the pendulum of stupidity in a minute. It's not just him. Political correctness has become a major bugaboo of the right in the past decade, a rallying cry after all that has gone wrong with liberalism and America. Conservative writers fill volumes complaining how political correctness stifles free expression and promotes bunk social theories about power structures based on patriarchy, race, and mass victimhood. Forbes charged that it stifles freedom of speech. The Daily Caller has gone so far as to claim that political correctness kills Americans.
Right.
But conservatives have their own nationalist version of PC, their own set of rules regulating speech, behavior, and acceptable opinions. I call it patriotic correctness. It's a full-throated, unnuanced, uncompromising defense of American nationalism, history, and cherry-picked ideals. Central to its thesis is the belief that nothing in America can't be fixed by more patriotism enforced by public shaming, boycotts, and policies to cut out foreign and non-American influences.
Right.
Insufficient displays of patriotism among the patriotically correct can result in exclusion from public life and ruined careers. It also restricts honest criticism of failed public policies, diverting blame for things like the war in Iraq to those Americans who didn't support the war effort enough.
Yeah.
It's almost like what was it? Peter Pan. If you believe in fairies, clap really hard. Something like that. Now, you didn't support the troops because you didn't wave your flag hard enough. When you waved your flag, they couldn't hear the whipping of the cloth in the wind.
Right.
Or if football man doesn't stand for the magic song, the sky cloth won't freedom properly.
Right. Yeah.
And quite frankly, I haven't seen the article, but I've heard about it. I believe it's an article. At any rate, my understanding is Jonah Goldberg, who is a conservative writer for National Review, I call it Nationalist Review, has said that there's absolutely no difference between the Trump deplorables and the social justice warrior left. That they're cut from the same cloth. About the only difference would be that the deplorables are wearing red pussy hats and the left liberals are wearing pink pussy hats.
Right. And
other than that, they're indistinguishable from each other in their behavior.
Right, and in their desires. There's nuance between exactly what they want, but ultimately what they want is for the government to force people they don't like to do things that they otherwise wouldn't do while simultaneously leaving them alone for the most part, because what they do is right, and they want to be allowed to do, they want permission, like you said, to do what they want to do, and that's it. And so it's not hard to convince someone that they should be free. It's a lot harder to convince them that other people should be free to do what they want, even if it's something you don't agree with and that hurts your feelings. Yeah. And that's what both sides are doing the same thing.
Yeah, and normally you do have an ideological dividing line where the left is typically considered to be pro drug use, where the right is considered to be pro gun use. Yep. And each side is opposed to the other's pro. So the left are anti-gun, and right. The right are anti-drug for the most part.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing, and we talked about this with that very first Prohibition era drug law or gun law, and it wasn't a big thing, but most freedom dies by 1,000 cuts, not a single slice.
Of course.
So it was the first one. It was the camel's nose under the tent of gun control in the realm of public safety of sorts. And it also set the conditions for, was it the Gun Control Act of 1935?
Yeah,
I think it was.
Getting rid of automatic weapons and all that stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Machine guns, right.
Yeah, it was the first shovel full of dirt out of the hole.
Right.
But anyway, here's the thing. As we've already demonstrated, if conservatives love the Second Amendment and their gun rights, which are two different things, if they love their gun rights, then they should absolutely positively be opposed to the war on drugs, because as we just demonstrated, prohibition has fueled the war on drugs, and the war on alcohol has fueled the war on guns.
And it's created gun violence that the left uses as a platform. Every time there's a shooting, the left seizes upon that crisis to say, this is why we need gun control. So no, anything that gets in the way of you being able to use whatever weapon you want to defend yourself needs to be gotten rid of, and that includes the drug war. But that would involve you allowing people to do stuff that you don't agree with, and that's the core problem with the authoritarian left and the authoritarian right, is that what they share in common 100% is that they don't think people especially people they don't like, but whether it's the rich or certain colors of people or certain religions or whatever, people they don't like in aggregate, to do stuff that they don't want them to do.
Yeah. Now, the important part of what you just said is they hate other people's freedom so much that they will give up their own freedom to take away somebody else's.
Exactly.
And this is where the dividing line crosses. This is where you get the people that they don't even support an ideology that was given to them, because they have no beliefs of their own. They're repeating what they are told by whatever talk show host or whatever great man politician that they worship.
Right.
And Trump, with Trump being a big government liberal Democrat for his whole career, one thing I will say about him is he has been such a genius to convince the right and the left that he is a conservative Republican.
I know
He has tricked everybody into believing that.
Yep.
But here's the thing: because these people they're following their great man, they're Trump, they're just Trump pansies, and the same thing on the left. But in this particular case, I was talking to a conservative. I was talking to a pro Second Amendment conservative. I was talking to a pro Second Amendment conservative that respects the Bill of Rights completely. Okay. Yet, he supported the Mulford Act back in 1967 in California, which outlawed open carry of firearms.
Oh, because of the Black Panther thing.
Yeah, the Black Panthers were going around the California state capitol to protest gun control laws. Here you have a leftist group protesting gun control laws, and a right-wing group is saying, oh my God, we need gun control. As a
knee-jerk thing. Yeah, exactly.
As a response to it.
Yep.
So this guy's talking about how he supported that because the Panthers were having their open carry Second Amendment rallies at the state capitol to protest gun control laws, and he feared for his safety. I called him a big government liberal, and he says, did you just assume my political ideology? I'm a conservative.
Right.
Yeah, I'm a. Uh, if you go by this ideological stereotype, a gun grabbing conservative is supposed to be like a libertarian socialist or a banana octopus.
Right, right, right.
And the same thing happened with the anti-war left under Obama during the Bush regime. They were out there protesting left and right,
Yeah.
and then the anti-war left when Obama came into office.
The anti-war left.
Yeah, and Obama kept with the drone bombing, and he had more confirmed kills than any other Nobel Peace Prize winner in his first year of being in office.
No, I know. I actually just had a discussion with someone about that, where they were talking about how Trump was bombing this place, and I said, yeah, that's terrible. And I said, you realize, like, Trump is basically on pace to kill as many people as Obama did. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, the war in Syria, the bombing of Libya, support for Saudi's war in Yemen, the continuation of the war in Afghanistan, the surge that was supposed to be followed by a drawdown that never happened. All of these things, and the drone bombing of children, the fact that he joked about drone bombing children, and this was a Obamacrat, leftist who said, well, I'm sure he had reasons. He probably has access to information that we don't know about and was trying to keep us safe. And I said, okay, well, Trump's doing the same thing. Oh, well, Trump's a racist. Oh, like, same office, same advisors, or mostly same advisors, same bureaucratic advisors, same war policy, same outcome, but because it's Obama doing it, clearly he had good reasons, but because Trump's doing it, clearly he's a racist. And the right, who told me that Obama was bending over for Islam and Islam was taking over the world, I'm like, Obama's killed more Muslims than any other person you can name offhand. So what's your problem? And now when Trump's doing exactly the same,
Saddam Hussein might have him beat.
Oh, I should say than any other American president.
Okay.
Killed more Muslims, and Trump is on pace to do the same thing. Now you're okay with it, and it's because Rush Limbaugh told you to be okay with it, or Sean Hannity, or whomever.
Yeah, so these people, they don't have any well thought out ideology. They're cutting the end off of the ham and throwing it in the baking dish because Rush Limbaugh cuts the end off of his ham and throws it in the baking dish.
He doesn't know why either. Yeah.
He has no idea why. It's because Bill Buckley cut the end off of his ham, because he was a communist. Right. So people have this idea of what they are, and they're not.
Right.
People think I've just learned this fairly recently, but the whole conservatism has never been about small government. And there's a fellow on Facebook that I've had some conversations with. I almost never agree with this guy, but there's some points that he makes that are so spot on, and I just love the way that he writes, and he puts up with my crap too. So he's just a sweetheart of a guy. His name's Charlie Harris, and he'll tell you, yeah, conservatism has never been about small government. Because if you look at the intellectual history of conservatism, you go back to people like Thomas Hobbes and Edmund Burke, and they're not. Hobbes was, we have to have the state because, people are bad.
Right.
So we need a government.
Angels,
So we need a government made up of people who are bad. So we need a government made up of people who are bad.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a picture, and it's that phrase. Yes. People are bad, so we need a government made of, and it's in a perfect circle, so that it just keeps going around and around. I love sharing. Yeah. That gets buried in my meme list, and I have to keep resaving it so that it's up at the top.
I have so many copies of that on my phone. I tell you what, I probably have 3,000 memes on just this phone right here.
Yeah.
And I don't have copies of memes. I have sock memes. Each meme has 2 or 3 socks, so I don't have to scroll as far to get there.
Right, exactly, yeah, because you can't. It doesn't let you.
It's complete nonsense on my part, probably yours too. But anyway,
exactly.
But when you look at them, it's nothing but a complete justification of the state, and it's not about any sort of restraint. It's about empowering the state for all these different so-called social goods, and quite frankly, a lot of it sounds like Rousseau and his social contract. But if you go down the line, after Hobbes and Burke, you have what was it, the early conservatives in America were the Tories. They
I
were
was
the
just
ones
going to
that,
say they wanted to
Yeah.
preserve the British crown. Exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
they were opposed to the Declaration of Independence. They were opposed to seceding from the crown. They're like, look, you might not have voted for him, but he's still your king. And you will respect him.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
You don't have to like the king, but you do have to respect the crown.
You have to respect the office. At least in the English-speaking world, in the Anglospheric world, the political right comes from the Tories. When the whole, the battle between whether to turn Britain into a republic that would have, of the people or whatever, that would have, entirely democratic with no royal family. The Tories were the ones saying, no, we need to stay royal to the crown, and they had religious reasons for doing it. They were Anglicans, and they believed that, God had given, what's the word I'm looking for?
Governments were ordained by God.
Ordained by God, but there's a term for it. But the sovereignty.
Coronation?
No, anyway, whatever. The sovereignty that the monarch had, based on divine.
The Lucky Sperm Club.
Yeah, the Lucky Sperm Club. And so they came from that, and it was the compromise between the conservatives, the Tories, and the liberals, the Republicans, oddly enough they were called, that came up with the idea of constitutional monarchy. We still have a monarch, but they're basically a figurehead, and we're basically a democracy. But that's where conservatism came from, the Tories and the Whigs. It was not a small government, secession, insurrectionist group. It was briefly to get rid of the British crown, and then it was immediately replaced with the new crown, which was the constitutional one.
Yeah, so in that regard, under the Federalists, you had the Revolution, and then you had the counter-revolution with the Constitution.
Right.
But the whole thing about conservatism is to ensure that absolutely nothing changes, or as little as possible that changes.
Right.
So they want to keep the British crown. Constitution comes in, they want to keep the Constitution. They don't want it to evolve. They don't want it to change. They were opposed to Social Security, but then when it was in there, it was conserved.
Yeah,
and
we have to conserve
if you look at the new conservatives, like the New Right, the Bill Buckleys in like the 50s, there was one. I don't know if you listen to Dangerous History podcast. It's at profcj.org. It's called The Betrayal of the Old Right, I think it was, or Out with the Old Right, In with the New Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he starts off with a quote by Bill Buckley, and it almost sounds like Bernie Sanders, with the exception of the calls for militarism.
Right.
And I guess Buckley's, because they want to preserve the traditions, and they use the guise of because tried and true, but what it really is preserving tradition for the sake of tradition is how I see it.
It's fear of change. It's just fear of change.
I guess his phrase was, if we could, we would stand in the way of history and say, stop, go back.
Yeah, standing athwart history, yelling stop, or something like that. Yeah.
So that is the history of conservatism. This small government, limited government stuff, that's never been an aspect of conservatism. That's something that people adopted. Yeah. And quite frankly, the new right, the neoconservatives, the Buckleyites, they were pretty much communists. They were Trotskyites. They just were anti-Soviet communists.
Right. They were anti-Bolsheviks. Yeah.
They wanted a different brand of communism. And quite frankly, when you look at the nationalism and the militarism and the idea that there must be such a national unity and that everything must be, I posted this quote earlier, I think it was today. Those that say that the country should have a direction are demanding a one-size-fits-all, cookie-cutter, coercive central plan. And quite frankly, they're no different than the Bolsheviks, who said this will be the order of this country. And those that say that this has to happen, those that say, well, the country should have a direction, we should have people in charge. The best that they can hope for is that the people in charge don't F it up too horribly, and that winds up like Venezuela or the Soviet Union or any of these other one-size-fits-all, cookie-cutter, coercive, centrally planned socialist utopias.
Run by conservatives.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing and that was what got me, because I went from being basically the only two things that I've always been consistent on is that I've always thought that guns should be legal and largely unrestricted, and that I've always thought drugs should be legal and largely unrestricted, and untaxed and all of that stuff. But
it's sold in vending machines,
sold at
in the private schools,
Family Dollar. And I've said this before, people should be able to get automatic thermonuclear grenade launchers from their toddler's heroin dealer.
Exactly.
So, and if you're against that, then don't do it. Or
from the gay couple that defends their marijuana field with AK-47s.
I'm fine with that as well. And again, if you're against that, then don't do it yourself. One of the things that
Grenadist.
What?
Grenadist.
Grenadist, exactly. One of the things that, and both sides do this as well, it seems like in order to be able to justify hatred, basically, is that you have to dehumanize the other side or whatever it is you hate. And we've seen this with the Nazis. They had school books for school children that compared Jews to funguses and to rats, and it sort of dehumanized Jews in their mind. In the U.S., it's a big thing to dehumanize. The left dehumanizes the rich in a huge way. They dehumanize the rich. They dehumanize increasingly white, males, cisgender males, and Christians as an aggregate. The right likes to dehumanize illegals and to some extent Muslims as well. And now you're seeing direct dehumanization of people based on just their partisanship. So you're seeing, ever since the election of Donald Trump, everyone on the left, and I see it all the time, and I get lumped in too because I'm against government, so people think I'm a conservative. I can't tell you how many times I've been accused of being a Russian bot. I'm not a real person. I'm a Russian bot. A very simple look at my Facebook profile shows I'm a human being. I have a wife. There's pictures of me with kids, but I'm a Russian bot. And the right now has these memes which I can't help but find hilarious. NPCs, the non-playable characters. Mm-hmm. They're saying the left aren't real people. They're not protagonists. They're NPCs.
Tovarищ.
What's that?
Da, tovarищ.
Yeah. And so
that's Russian for yes, comrade.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. This, how people are so quick to, it's like, oh, you disagree with me, you're not a real person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the dehumanization has always existed for war.
Right.
That's always been a part of the propaganda.
Of course.
If you look at going back to Nazi Germany, the term Untermenschen, less than human or lesser men, and that also was applied. Pamela just brought this up. Blacks have been dehumanized for over 400 years here in
absolutely.
the USSA.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about slavery was they were considered not humans, and that was a justification for doing it. Or there were laws that no slave could, or no Christian could be enslaved, so they prohibited slaves from being Christians. But think about this. All the racism that goes into defining the enemy. In Vietnam, you had they were Gooks, Slopes, Chinks. Just every other Asian slur under the stars.
Yeah.
Over in the Middle East is Dune, Coon, San, N-word, and all this other crap.
Right.
But in the PC culture of today, they don't have as much of it. So you got to go with the standard traditional towel head or camel jockey, because I guess that's still allowed. But in war, you have to dehumanize the enemy. My biggest catalyst to giving up my bloodlust and my love of war was the War Prayer by Mark Twain. And what he does is he talks about what is going to happen. And he wrote that in the lead up to the Spanish-American War. And because he knew the response that he would get afterwards, after publishing it, he said that this can't be published until after I'm dead, because the people will freak out. They'll call for his blood. And he had a
Right.
lot of great anti-war writings, but the whole story behind the war prayer is you have this small town and they're preparing to send their boys off to go fight for God and country.
Right.
And they have the parades and the music, and of course you have the church service and the preacher's at the pulpit, and he says, "Dear Lord, please protect our boys out there and make their bullets fly straight and do this and do that and all this other stuff." And this old man who looks like a rag picker goes up to the pulpit and gently moves the preacher aside, and he says, "I was sent by the man that you have prayed to. He has heard your prayer, both of them. When you say that your soldiers' bullets should shoot straight, it will be granted. The bullets will cut through the flesh of the young men, widowing their wives and orphaning their children.
Right.
The shells will fire true, and their villages will burn, and the survivors will freeze to death in the snow." And that is the reality of war. And that, after hearing that, I could not unhear it.
Right.
And every time that I started to get my neoconish ways up and like, yeah, get those Arabs and kill them all. Let God sort them out and all sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I could not unhear it. I kept going back to those words, and that is when the morality of anarchism and being anti-state came into play.
Right.
Because I've seen what happens to people through war. I've seen the results on, if it's as bad for the winning side, the American side, then just imagine what it's like for people in the Middle East. A guy has a tour in Afghanistan and gets PTSD. What do you think happens to somebody that lives there?
That's what.
And they have a lifelong combat tour because they have a foreign invader that's occupying and going through and kicking in doors like a SWAT team looking for civil asset forfeiture.
Yeah.
Here's one for you. Do you think that the current number of 20 veterans committing suicide each day is because they feel pride in what they've done to defend God and country?
Yeah.
And the reason I say the current 20 is because the number has gone down. The acknowledged number was 22. But the thing that you have to remember is that is only based upon reporting, and not all states report the same way. And there might be cases where a veteran commits suicide and it just doesn't get reported because of some bureaucratic snafu. But that's not really the big deal, because not all of those veterans are combat veterans that are committing suicide.
Right.
But the number that you do want to pay attention to is the current acknowledged 22 active duty service members today that are killing themselves. They're committing suicide, either over there or after they've just come back, or if they're on their way to go over there.
Yeah. Why are they doing it? It's obviously, I mean, there are going to be people that they would have killed themselves anyway. But if you're presenting this as, there's this very unique thing of active duty, well, why? Why are they killing themselves? And what is it that they're seeing and taking part in that they know that they can't get out of because they signed a contract saying they have to? What is it that they're seeing? And then on the flip side of that, what do you think the suicide rate is in the places that they're being bombed? And I can't imagine everyone there is like, yeah, I'm real excited to live today. I'm sure the suicide rate is through the roof there as well. The ones that haven't been killed. So I mean, it's that whole, and I'll talk to people I love and care about, people who will ask me how my dog's doing, and then I'll talk to them about this, and you see it happen. They're like, well, they want us dead. They hate our freedoms. They support such and such. They want to have nukes, whatever it is. And you see it happen. These people that are, hyper concerned about the people around them and that are, care about the humanity of people, have so dehumanized these human beings who have every bit as much hopes and dreams and loves and fears and whatever that we do, and are just as much of a important thing to someone else. They're ready for that whole region, millions of people, to be nuked because they dared to insult Israel or you know, they want to also
they
have
didn't
nuclear.
dare to insult. Allegedly, their politicians did.
Their politician insulted Israel, or their politicians also want to have the same nuclear weapons that our politicians have had since our grandparents were kids, and they've completely dehumanized them. And now we're seeing it in a domestic level where they're dehumanizing the Democrats or the Republicans. And I bring all this up to say these are the fruits of forced association. The reality is none of us would voluntarily associate with the vast majority of other people in the continent or in this country for various reasons. They don't share our values. They aren't in our social strata. We don't have the same religious beliefs. It's not to say we couldn't be around them, but we're not going to associate closely with them. And yet we're all forced to be in a very close association where we're all robbed of our wealth. The remainder of our wealth is depleted through, you know, our currency being made more and more worthless. We are forced to, you know, obey the same laws. We're forced into this, you know, basically hostage situation together. And we're told that we are allowed to vote for and against one another to see who gets the short end of the stick and who gets the long end of the stick. So people that we already wouldn't have associated to begin with, we're now in basically warfare in the ballot box for, you know, who gets harmed the most and who gets harmed the least. And so our aggression and our discontent with our situation is channeled passive aggressively through voting to harm people for the simple fact that we don't like them. And it's war on a domestic scale.
And what's even worse is you're getting giant turd and hunk of poo and being told that you have a choice.
Right, exactly.
And it's not a choice. It is far from a choice. But so long as you're arguing over wanting giant turd over hunk of poo, then you are doing what is allowable. That's the allowable opinion. And so long as you're not saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't have any poo or turds running around. Because that's when it gets dangerous. When you start talking about there should be no turds or poo in my life.
And they don't like that. That's when you get deplatformed.
Yes. That's when your page gets taken down.
That's when your page gets taken down, is when you say that, you know, I don't want any more scat play.
Yeah. So, but let's get to a larger point here. I think we've already talked about how the social justice warrior and the cultural justice warriors are kissing cousins of collectivism.
Right.
Now, and we've already touched on the subject that you could show somebody facts, logic, and reality, and as soon as you do that, they will click refresh, go back to their default setting, and go back with their original programming.
Right.
So what that tells me is, because let's think about this. How many people have you convinced that the state was wrong, that it was immoral, that it was illegitimate, and that it was... you shouldn't have too much trouble with the brutal inefficiency, but nobody's going to say, well, gosh, we got to give that up. You know, when Ronald Reagan said, the government does nothing as effective as the private market, what he should have followed that up was, and that is a reason to abolish government completely.
Right.
But what would have happened had he said that? Most people would have absolutely freaked out, lost their minds. Republicans would have been waving their flag really hard, saying, no, we're not giving up this inefficient thing because my Constitution, my founding Führers, and everything else.
Exactly.
So how can you have a logical conversation with the average statist? By the way, I've got a fair number of people that have told me that I've played a significant role in the changing of their mindset. It's nowhere near to create a movement. Right. But I've had a fair number of people that have said that I've been influential. But I'm also kind of public too, having done a nationally syndicated radio show and other stuff.
Right. Yeah, I've had a few people that are anarchists now, in part at least because of talking with them. I have a lot of people who I've gotten to admit that, you know, government is morally bad, but they then fall back to, but they have to protect us from illegals, or they have to protect us from Muslims, or they're a necessary evil, or people aren't good. Or a lot of times I've gotten people that'll say, well, we can't get rid of this part of government until we get rid of insurance companies and run all over us. So they don't let go of this one thing, or they'll say just in general, well, people aren't good or whatever. So I get a lot of that. But I mean, I've changed some minds, but most people are. And then for all of those, there's way more people that have just either unfriended me or unfollowed me or told me I'm crazy and that I need to read Romans 11 or Romans 13 or whatever crap they come up with. So yes, no, most people don't want to change their mind. They have an emotional tie to this belief that the government that they hate is going to, is necessary to protect them from the bad people.
Yeah, could you imagine like some pro-Second Amendment conservative looking at the video of the cops going and confiscating guns in Katrina, saying, "Look, did you just see Nancy Pelosi go in there and take those people's guns?"
Right.
Or if you say, "No, that's not Nancy Pelosi; those are cops." Well, the Democrats made them do it. Well, they're doing it, but they're doing it.
Yeah.
But no, they're not. No, they're not.
Yeah.
Those are Democrats in cop uniforms.
Yeah.
And they will come up with mental gymnastics that not even the East German judge can give them a bad score. Now, when people start talking about what you're talking about is an emotional response that lacks logic. I'm going to talk about the people that are incrementalists, the ones that say that everything has to be taken down slowly because it'll be anarchy if there isn't. And now it's a fact that if Social Security disappeared tomorrow, whether it dried up on its own or whether the government collapsed and it was no longer there, that would be a problem for a lot of people that did not plan accordingly.
Absolutely, it would be a huge travesty. Yeah.
For those that believed that Social Security was going to take care of them, it would be a crisis.
Yeah.
But when you have these measured reductions, are you familiar with Robert Higgs' book Crisis in Leviathan?
I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Okay. I haven't read the whole thing, but I've read some excerpts from it. And the central theme in there is that crisis has always been the catalyst for growth in government. That is why government has increased its power at high pace or high speed in large amounts at given times because of the crisis, and that crisis is usually war. So if you look at post 9/11, the Patriot Act was rushed through. Nobody had time to look at the cover or anything else, and quite frankly, the Patriot Act had been around for quite a while, and they were waiting for an opportunity to whip it out, and this just happened to be it. But the thing is, they talked about how this was going to fight terrorism. And one of the first publicly acknowledged uses of the Patriot Act for racketeering and funding of terrorism was taking down a Goodfellas strip joint in Jersey.
I know. Yep.
Yeah. So
had nothing to do with terrorism.
Yeah. So when somebody says, "Well, we need to get troops on the borders and all this other stuff," my question will be, one of my questions, along with, so how do you think the Affordable Border Control Act is going to work? One of the things I'll ask is, can you name a government program that maintained its original scope and didn't engage in mission creep? Because let's face it, the bureaucrats that administer these programs, they're just creeps on a mission.
Exactly.
So anyway, what you have is you have these increases in power, always because of a crisis and usually because of war. And after the crisis has been averted, you never go back to the ante. You never go back to where you started. It's always bigger than it was when it started.
Yep.
So if you're at level 5 and it goes up to 10, you never get back to 5. The best you can hope for is 6 or 7.
Yep.
And then it ramps up again. And it goes from 6 or 7 to 10 or 11, and then it goes down to like 8 or 9. Right.
The trend is upwards. It may it may ebb and flow, but the trend, that ebb and flow, is working its way upwards. So my argument here, and I'm going to go with
William Lloyd Garrison, who was an abolitionist, and talking about the incremental reduction of slavery to a point that it would eventually be gone. Gradualism in theory is perpetuity in practice. For the people that use the incrementalism strategy, incrementalism is a one-way street to tyranny. They always say, well, the government didn't get big overnight, it's not going to get small overnight. Well, it's not going to get small over the long period either.
Yeah.
Even when Harding and Coolidge were at the helm, in some areas government got smaller, but in some areas government got bigger.
It got bigger.
And the long-term effects of government getting bigger under their reign are probably just as devastating as government getting bigger after Hoover and FDR and Truman and all these others took over. Well, that's another reason why you can't depend upon politics to reduce the size of government.
Right. No, absolutely. And you're not, like I said, I'm Americans for Liberty and Young Americans for Liberty and the all these different groups and
campaign for a tiny bit more liberty.
Yeah, all these groups.
I don't that baseball.
What's that?
Okay, I was at a campaign for a tiny bit more liberty event in Michigan, down in the Detroit area, a few years ago.
Okay.
And I was talking to the heads of the local chapter, and they were talking about, because they're all activists. They weren't really deeply involved in politics, like they weren't on staff or anything like that. And they're listing all the activists that got involved in politics, like became the staff members for different politicians. And they're talking about the different activists in the Tea Party that wound up getting little patronage positions through the state government and through the party and everything else.
Right.
And they're talking about 100% of the activists, and they named some people that I knew. They said 100% of the activists within 1 year of going to DC or going to the state capitol or whatever, once they got into the belly of the beast, every last one of them sold out.
Yep. And
I says, well, how about the politicians that you guys have endorsed? And with the exception of Ron Paul, and Ron Paul's no angel, and he's just a man, and he's not worthy of deification.
Right.
But all the politicians that they didn't really endorse, but they rated, all the politicians that they gave good ratings to sold out.
Yeah.
I used to be involved in the political process and campaigns and stuff like that. And people say, well, we're going to make the change at the local level. The local level is so much more cutthroat than the national level, because at the national level, there's a lot of power to fight over. At the local level, it's scraps.
Yeah.
And when you have scraps of power, they will fight more fiercely for that little bit.
Well, and they see it as a stepping stone to, regional, state, federal. They're fighting for. It's like using that comparison of the fighters when they're working their way up the ranks to become champion. Their hardest fights are when they're at the where they're not even being televised yet, because they're just trying to get a foothold into being able to do those bigger things. So yeah, absolutely. I any good that's coming from those types of advocacy is solely in educating people as to why they should want to be free, and for not just for them to be free, but for others to be free. I was influenced by Ron Paul. I was influenced by the Koch brothers and Young Americans for Liberty and the Enterprise
American Enterprise Institute.
Yeah. All of those things have been helpful, and the von Mises caucus
and they're all distractions. The one thing that I absolutely positively hate about Ron Paul, and a little bit Justin Amash too, because those are probably my most favorite government thugs, and I've met Justin at least on one occasion. But anyway, the thing that I absolutely positively hate about them is they have given people so much false hope in the process. Because let's take a look at what's going to happen in politics. And I was recently at Agora Fest over in South Dakota. It's the Minneapolis folks go out there.
Okay.
And I had this conversation with one of the guys there, and he kind of wants to be involved. He thinks the LP can do things and stuff like that. But here's the big thing. How are you planning on getting something accomplished? Because there's a Jack Ryan book by Tom Clancy. I think it's Dead of Honor, where he winds up being the vice president to fill in for the vice president that had to resign. So he gets asked to take this position, be a caretaker for a few months until the election, and they can find somebody else. And a plane takes out the U.S. Capitol during a joint session, and basically you only have the designated survivors there. The executive branch is wiped out. The Supreme Court is wiped out. The darn near everybody in the House and Senate are wiped out. Like I said, it's the designated survivor scenarios.
Okay.
Where they've got the undersecretary of fish and hogs,
right?
Out somewhere. But he had just been sworn in as vice president, and because he had been sworn in as vice president, he becomes president. So in that particular situation where you've eliminated almost the entire Congress, you have an opportunity at a fresh start. And I was actually, because I believe that government was a necessity at the time, I'm thinking, hey, wow, here's a great opportunity. In the way that he wrote it, I think it eventually went back to being the cesspool, the Mos Eisley of planet Earth that it is.
Right.
But he tried to show it in a good light, and it didn't go bad. It just went government. But anyway, right. So here's what you have to look at. And I was talking to this guy, and he says, well, can you go in at the local level and do all this stuff? I said, well, here's what you have to figure. If the Libertarian Party gets in there, they're going to need some support. You're going to need bipartisan support, or you're going to need people to work across the aisle. Unless for somehow or another you get everybody to embrace libertarian ideals, which means that the elderly have to vote against Medicare and Social Security spending. Parents and teachers have to vote against education spending. Police and military have to vote against crime in defense spending.
Right.
Everybody has to vote against their interests, or in other words, all these selfish people have to quit putting their own interests ahead of the good of the nation.
Right.
Okay. You see where I'm going with this,
which is what's required for communism to work. I mean, any of these things require people to let go of their own self-interest and give to the common good.
Yeah, if you give up a little bit, and if you live in squalor, then that means that there could be an equality of squalor. And I'm sorry, people aren't doing that on their own.
Right.
And the old phrase that once people find out that they can vote for their living, they will.
Yeah.
That's come true. So what you're looking at is, okay, you're a libertarian and you want to get cannabis legalization, and you want to legalize it, tax it, and regulate it. So you don't want real freedom. You want freedom light. You want sort of free.
You want licensing, yeah. You want a license.
Yeah, you want permission. Not actual freedom, you want permission. So you go over to your Democratic comrades and say, hey, I could really use your support on this. You know what? I really like that. I could use your support on something too. Could you could you help me with this increase in food stamps? Because there's a lot of hungry people out there and they're just not able to eat. And the response is going to be, well, I'm a libertarian. My constituency elected me to reduce welfare spending and legalize cannabis. And the Democrat will say, well, my constituency is concerned about hungry children eating and going to bed with a full belly at night. How can I support you if you don't do a little give and take? And you have this little thing that's called compromise. And people always say, the pragmatic ones say that you have to compromise. And to compromise means to give up something that you already have in order to keep something that you already have.
Right.
Or to give up something that you already have in order to get something back that you had before you compromised the previous time.
Right.
And it works the same with the Republicans. You go to them and say, hey, how about this cannabis legalization? Well, you know what? The Police Officers Association of the state, I don't think that they would support me going for
Right.
that.
Right.
So the only way that we could do that is if there's a very high tariff on or very high tax, which goes directly to police spending. Maybe send it uh, over to education, and we're going to need stiff penalties for people that violate the regulations because, well, you know what? The prison guard unions are my supporters also.
Right. Right.
Well, that's not freedom. I mean, we're not trying to turn this into the medical market. We're trying to decrease the size of government. Well, we are decreasing the size of government. Look at this balloon that I have in my hand. See how I squeeze it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what happens. So that's what compromise is. But if you talk about this needs to be fully decriminalized, and no, it shouldn't be taxed. No, it shouldn't be regulated. And after it's decriminalized, a bunch of cops are going to need to get laid off because we can't afford to pay those government employees pensions and health care and benefits and wages and all this other stuff is too bloated, and people will freak out. And when you start talking about actual freedom and when you start talking about solving problems, it's so far outside of the Overton window that the average person is like somebody in 1890 that sees an automobile for the first time. They look at this iron carriage and they say, well, that's a pretty fancy wagon you got there. What? I see you got a bumper up there, and hey, how do you attach the horse to that thing?
Right.
Well,
Right.
you don't attach the horse to it. You pop the hood, you show them the engine, and you say, this is what makes it go. And they look at the engine, they say, wow, I bet that makes that thing really heavy. I think you're going to need a second horse. How are you going to get two horses on there? I can't even see how you attach the first horse. No, you don't have horses. You go inside, you turn on the ignition, and they look at the seats and they say, does a horse ride in here? And
Right.
and all this time you're talking about something completely new, and they're just wondering what the horse has to do with this thing. And it goes back to what Henry Ford said, and this is why you can't trust voters either. Henry Ford said if I'd asked the people what they wanted, they just said they wanted faster horses because they just couldn't conceive of a automobile.
Right.
And the problem with voters and politicians is you leave your future, you have to live your life, and your prosperity is dependent upon the limits of other people's imaginations, the limits of people with small minds.
Yep. Exactly.
So I'm going to go anti Bastiat here, and the way to prosperity is by breaking Overton windows, shattering them.
So what is your
Hang on for a second. Pamela asked, what is the Overton window? The Overton window is the limits of allowable public opinion. As an example, with I said this earlier, with tax rates, excuse me. When you're talking about tax rates, saying that there shouldn't be any taxes is outside the Overton window. That means
Right.
you're just absolutely crazy and you want children to be uneducated and old people to die.
Right.
So what you can argue about is if the top tax rate should be 34% or 36%. Because at 37%, you're a communist, and at 33%, you're an anarchist.
Right.
So it's basically the allowable opinion. You
Yep.
can't go outside of that. Anything outside of that is considered extremism.
And all of the work of political lobbying and advocacy is to try to move that window closer to what you actually really want. And so there's this jockeying of position to try to move it this way while arguing for this. You're also trying to move it over to where it's actually, closer to what you want. Whereas what we're saying is, screw the Overton window. We're just going to say what it is we want. And Pamela sees it on my page. I say things and people come on and lose their minds because I'm challenging their God. I'm challenging their idol.
Absolutely.
I'm challenging their idol. And I have zero interest talking about, well, maybe we could do this and then extend. No, this is wrong. This is morally wrong. And if you're going to sit here and tell me this is what you support, now explain to me how you would also be in favor of, chattel slaves being forced to go back to be mastered, because that was illegal. Or, if you're okay with this tax, explain to me. One of my actually really good friends was challenging me on taxes, and she was explaining why taxation is not theft, and it's a society and everything else. And I said, okay, I can't. If I go to your house and rob you, I'm assuming you're against that. And I'll further assume that if I come to your house with a group of 10 people and say, give me your money or I'll kill you, but we're going to use some of it to help the poor, but give me your money or I'll kill you, you'd be against that as well. I will assume that. I know based on what you're saying that you're okay with the federal government, the, let's say, 3.5 million people that are a part of the federal government being involved in basically coming to your house and saying, give me your money or I'll kill you. You're okay with that. So explain to me where somewhere between 10 and 3.5 million is where an immoral act suddenly becomes moral. Where is that line? Is it 10,000? Is it 100,000? Is it a million? And she never responded. But it's because I'm refusing to operate within their 3.5-inch flash card or their Overton window, and Lou does the same thing. This is wrong. We're saying it's wrong, and if you're going to say it's right, explain why it's right. The burden's on you. You've come to me to tell me this thing is right. I've explained how it's wrong. Now explain to me how it's right. And they don't, because no one ever challenges them to do that. They challenge them to say, tell me why the tax rate should be X instead of Y. And that becomes a jockeying over how much money is needed to fund different things, or whether this many immigrants should be allowed in, or this many, or whether we should bomb this country or just sanction them. It's never about, no, they shouldn't be doing any of that.
If taxation without consent is not robbery, then any band of robbers have only to declare themselves a government, and all their robberies are legalized. Exactly. I want to lay out this. Lysander Spooner, by the way. Yeah. I want to lay out a very important point here. When you say taxation is theft, and somebody says, "But my roads,"
right?
Or what about how would people get educated? How would this happen? How would the poor be taken care of, or the old be taken care of? Those are not arguments against taxation being theft. What those are is rationalizations for theft.
Yeah.
They're arguing for necessity, or maybe even efficiency, right, in their minds.
But they never actually say it's not theft. Yeah.
Yeah. What they're not saying is that taxation is not theft. They're just saying that it's necessary. And they're also showing the limits of their imagination. And Steve had chimed in here just a couple minutes ago. She says, like I said before, no imagination and laziness. Freedom takes us doing everything ourselves and being ingenious. And this is what you get out of the communists. They talk about seizing the means of production.
Yep.
Well, the thing about seizing the means of production is once you seize them, you actually have to produce. Right. And the people that talk about the worker-owned co-ops, that want to be worker owners, they're focusing more on the owner part and less on the worker part, because they want to sit around. They envision the owners as the people that sit around and do nothing. Exactly. And quite frankly, a lot of these companies, especially when they're getting started, these are people that are putting in 16, 18-hour days that have a pillow and blanket in their office on a lumpy couch.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a lumpy couch so that they'll only sleep for a couple hours and then go back to taking a look at things. And there's been numerous of these factory owners that have done that, yeah, because that was what was necessary. But if you look at the history of prosperity, the history of prosperity has not come from decrees, because it was in, I believe, is in the trial for Sir Thomas More in the book of Man for All Seasons. I believe his opening statement at trial was, if the earth is flat, can the king declare it to be round? If it is round, can a declaration of Parliament make it flat again?
Right.
And stuff doesn't happen simply because
you told someone to, yeah.
Because somebody says it is. Prosperity doesn't come into existence because politicians declare somebody prosperous. And people are stupid enough to believe that it does and that it can happen. And they have this notion that if you steal from one, then, well, that person had more than they needed. But they get this crap in school. But the whole laziness thing comes from I want to have all this stuff and I want to do as little to get it. But I think I already said this with Frederick Douglass. You can't expect the crops to grow if you don't agitate the soil and dig and all that other crap.
Right.
I'm really butchering his quotes tonight. So he's got some really good ones. But
Right.
anyway,
Another politician, another one of your favorite government thugs.
Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, he was an elected official.
Oh,
He was a congressman. He was a Republican congressman.
oh God. So anyway, but the thing is, if you look at the history of human progress, with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, that is when humans, and especially here in America, went from subsistence living to being prosperous. And
Right.
today, the poor people of today are better off than the wealthy in some of these other countries.
Oh yeah.
And the reason they got that way is because of the productivity that's happened over the years. People talk about how technology is taking jobs away. There were people that thought that the internet was gonna, they're not, maybe not the internet. The internet turned out to be an economic boom, even though Paul Krugman had said that by 2005 we would find out that the internet was no more of a factor on the economy than the fax
machine. Right.
He
Right.
said
Right.
that in the 90s, but Paul Krugman
He said that
is
he said that in the late 90s. He didn't
Yeah.
say that in 94. He said that in like 1998 or 99. Who in 99 thought the internet was not going to be impactful to the economy?
Well, Paul Krugman is an expert in things that are wrong. But anyway, if you look at automation, what automation did was the productive ability, the ability of fewer people to do more, took children out of the workplace. Children weren't in factories and working on the farms because their parents hated them and thought that they should suffer.
Right.
No, it was because their labor was necessary to get the job done and because they could not be productive enough on their own to support themselves. And that has been a universal truth even to this day, where you still have child labor in the third world countries.
Right.
And going and implementing child labor laws in a place that's not productive enough to take children out of the workforce is a sentence to being sold into sex slavery for these kids. It happened in Bangladesh within the past 20 years.
Yep.
But the thing is, automation and the technology keeps getting better and better. It doesn't destroy jobs. It frees people up to do other things. It used to be that with agriculture, that like 90% of the population worked in agriculture because that's
Right.
what they had to do.
Because they had
grow their
to.
own food.
Because they had to just to be able to have enough food to live. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine tending your farm with rickety hand tools? I'm not even talking about the fancy stuff you get at Home Depot. I'm talking
Yeah.
about the stuff that your neighbor builds for you because he kind of knows about these things.
Right.
Or where you have a mule pulling a rickety plow. Could you imagine how much back injuries were reduced because they had tractors?
Yeah.
Quite frankly, the only real risk of getting a back injury from modern tractors is if you jump off of there and land improperly.
Right.
But
And technology creates new reality. I mean, look at this. I have a freaking TV show that anyone on Earth can watch with an internet connection, and I'm connected with you, who is like 1,000+ miles away, and we're both, I don't know what you've got. I've got less than, like, even including my laptop, which I already had to begin with, I've got less than like $1,300, $1,300 in this whole thing, and I'm able to have a TV show of decent quality that is, I'm able to do at will and show to anyone. That wasn't true even 5 years ago, and it was not even some.
20 years ago, you had to go down to the local cable company and get on public access.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I've done a nationally syndicated radio show. Well, actually, it's more than just national, because we've been streamed on a few networks outside of the U.S.
Okay.
and then also on some pirate stations too. But the thing is, I've done a syndicated network radio show from my guest room / recording studio
Right.
/ hobby room.
Yeah. And that's all because of
Charge.
technology from the market.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be where radio hosts would have to get in their car, go to the station, and do all these things. And quite frankly, everything's getting easier. It requires less arduous labor. It requires less time working to be able to do all these different things than it did 10, 20, and especially 100 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Not even no comparison then. Yeah.
So here's the thought. People look at things the way that they are, but not the way that they could be. So as an example, we talked about the war on drugs earlier, and people associate the gang warfare with drugs and not prohibition. Could you imagine if there was no prohibition? It had for some reason or another, it just didn't happen.
Right.
Could you imagine people trying to talk about the violence in Chicago or any of these other places?
Right.
There'd be no violence to talk about. Now let's take a step further. Let's say that you did not have a monopolized money. Let's say you had a commodity-based money and you didn't have legal tender laws. And people chose good money. Let's say Europe back in the 80s is a prime example. The Italian lira was just garbage. The East German mark was garbage. A lot of people wouldn't even accept the East German mark. Same with the lira, for that matter. But everybody accepted the German mark because it was a strong currency over there.
Right.
So imagine you don't have legal tender laws and you have all these different competing currencies, or you just have a couple currencies. Right. And every time one screws up, another one pops up to take its place. Now, just imagine if the currency that you use is junk. Okay, it's the Italian lira or the Mexican peso,
right,
or the East German mark, and you go and you want to buy something, but people won't take it because it loses value.
Right.
It's not going to be worth anything tomorrow, or it's not usable. So what happens is that drives that currency out of the market. That currency would go out of business. But let's say you have a strong currency, and because the money supply is kept at a steady level and it's not inflated, the purchasing power stays. Or better yet, over time it's a deflationary currency, because the gains in productivity always lead to lower costs. I look at consumer electronics today. I remember when the first DVD players came out. I had a Toshiba single tray, and the only thing it played was regular DVDs and music CDs. It wouldn't do burnable DVDs. Well, burnable DVDs didn't even exist yet. I don't even think that burnable CDs existed yet. They may have, but anyway.
Right.
And it would only play one. You can't even get that DVD player today. They throw that DVD player in when you buy like a 12-pack of Energizer batteries. That's how low rent it is.
Right.
But the thing is, that was a $400 DVD player.
Yep.
If you go by normal inflation today, that should probably be about $700. But you can buy a DVD player that's 10 times better and does more for half of the price, for $200.
Right, and it's reaching a point with technology that DVD players aren't even necessary anymore because you can stream in 4K now. So I mean, it's in a less than 25-year period, DVDs have gone from being new to the market to being obsolete. And it's because consumer electronics and also furniture is another one that pricing has gone down relative to value over the last 20, 30 years. These are markets that are not as heavily regulated, not as heavily taxed and feed, and not as heavily subsidized as other markets. And as a result, you're getting an increasing, value to cost ratio. Then you look at other markets like healthcare, like education, school books. These are things where the value to cost ratio continues to plummet because of central planning.
And to top it off, one of the biggest excuses for the high price in healthcare is attributed to new technology. And it's not really new technology. Yeah. It's improvements on previous technology. If technology was the reason for higher prices, then consumer electronics would be higher prices too. It would coincide because it's the same thing.
Right. Exactly.
So here we are. Imagine we're in a stateless society. We have good money because the consumer demand says that the money must be good.
Right.
People aren't going to take crap coin. You know, Dogecoin would never be a standard currency. Bitcoin, Ethereum, stuff like that, stable currencies would be in market demand, and we see this in cryptocurrency. I mean, there's altcoins out there that, you know, they're considered tokens. They're like the old Pogs.
Right. They're like Chuck E. Cheese tokens. Yeah.
Yeah. I know nobody cares about it. Nobody will accept them.
Right.
But through the cryptocurrency, you have the spontaneous orders. It's not even regulated.
It's not regulated at all.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nobody has regulated Bitcoin as the predominant one, or Ethereum, or any of this other stuff.
No.
And quite frankly, to see what's happening there, and not to mention the people that invested in Bitcoin, or heck, even just the people that were users of Bitcoin that had a lot of Bitcoin on hand because they had used it when it first came out.
Right.
And, you know, stuff came in, stuff came out. And do you know how many of people from our group of sorts are millionaires now?
Yeah.
You know, nobody knew it was going to happen. I'm
Right.
sure there's probably a few people that suspected it, but nobody could say conclusively that this was going to happen. So,
No, of course.
But follow me on this. When you have good currency that doesn't lose value, and as a matter of fact, it gains purchasing power over time.
Right.
What you've done is you've reduced your need to work hard, and that's why you can retire earlier. That's why retirement exists in the first place, because the need to work hard, the productivity that you could have early on would be enough to take care of you for your entire life. Where at one time, you just couldn't be productive enough. The average person couldn't do it. And it wasn't Social Security that saved them. It was the increases in productivity.
Right.
It's the reason why we don't need to work 16-hour days. Or
And why we don't
12-hour
have to
days.
work until we drop dead one day. Like, I mean, you know, right. Yeah, exactly.
But this stuff didn't happen overnight. I mean, the people today, like the discussions that we're having today, I doubt if we invented anything tonight. All these ideas that we're sharing have come about from somebody else. Granted, we're changing a lot of the stuff around to go with the times, and we may be saying words that have never been said, but the ideas behind those words are not new. We stand on the shoulders of those that came before us.
Yep.
But because of the work of those that came before us, we have to work less today.
Yep.
And because we work today, people of tomorrow will have to work less.
Yep. Exactly.
And that is the order of things. And when you have when you have building upon the work of others, and you're able to build upon the work of others, that is where prosperity comes from. So people have this notion of socialism is going to provide this stuff. No, socialism isn't going to provide anything because nobody's working.
Right.
And quite frankly, the people that I know that are socialists or communists, all but one of them are lazy dirtbags that won't lift a finger, that I know personally.
Yeah, they don't do anything. I don't think I know any actual, especially like the anarcho-socialists or they're losers. Like, they don't, I mean, I think there's one I know that has a small business, but like they aren't really doing anything with their lives. And so they have this concept of, we're going to seize production. And then what? You're going to ruin that too. Like, I mean, you know, what are you doing? What are you doing with what you have?
I've been out to a couple of ANCOM communes, and those people, I don't know who's reminding them to keep breathing, but they're about as sharp as a sack of wet mice.
Right.
And they're all filthy. They think of soap and water like they think of work. They don't want nothing to do with either one.
Right. Yeah. Filthy, stinking capital communists didn't come out of nowhere like that.
Yeah. And it's not just like a couple people in one group or just one group. It's a common trend.
Yeah, it is. It's a very common trend. We could have a whole episode about that. But so go ahead.
Let me just wrap up my thought on this.
Sure.
So anyway, Steve said that people are lazy. Now, here's the thing, and I think I've already said this. I'll probably be belaboring the point a little bit. a little work now saves a lot of work tomorrow. And
Right.
if people are going to, socialism is going to provide them provide them the prosperity. It's going to require work and productivity to do this. You will do less under productivity and work and gain more than you would under socialism, the lack of productivity.
Right.
You will waste more time. You will not have leisure time because there will be no leisure activities. There will be nothing there. And you will live better. But you're going to have to invest some time and energy and ingenuity. And one last thing, and then I'm just going to shut up a little bit. If you look at the people that have revolutionized humanity, those that have come up with the creations, not everybody could have envisioned computer systems. Not everybody could have envisioned live streaming and internet and all these other things. But people that could not envision them, people that can't even understand how they work, have benefited from them.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So because of the capital investment and the productivity that was involved in creating those things, the smart have benefited the not as smart. There's no dumb people coming up with new medications or medical procedures. It's smart people doing this.
Right.
So what capitalism has done, that is the true from each according to his ability to each according to his need.
Mm.
Those that are capable have provided for those that were not capable of providing for themselves. They have benefited. And in that regard, going back to Hayek, capitalism has rendered greed completely harmless.
Yep. Absolutely. And made it a beneficial thing, made it a mutually beneficial thing. So, well, Lou, thank you so much for your time. I know now, because Paul Gordon's going to be on, I think, in 2 weeks. And so I guess I'll be looking forward to a 3-hour and 22-minute episode in 2 weeks, because he insists on breaking your record every time he comes on. Neither
this
of you
is
are
supposed to be about 1 hour.
Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. We definitely hit an hour. Now, neither of you will break Timon Pearson's record, where we hit, I think, just north of 4 hours. I hope to God I never reach 4 hours again. That was great. It was a great conversation, but yeah, I'm probably not going to do that again. So thank you so much for your time. Any final thoughts? Any stuff you want to plug before we go?
Well, as I mentioned, I don't think politics is going to work out. I think I've done a pretty good job of pointing at the obstacles. So I would say don't occupy, vacate.
Okay.
You can find me at lousandershow.com. I haven't put out too much stuff recently. I think the last time I put something out was after my last appearance on your show. I did a blog post called Colonial Lives Matter for the 4th of July.
Yeah.
It's my biggest moving post to date. It's gotten the most traffic, I think. It even surpassed Dana Martin. But I should have some new stuff coming out in the very near future. I'm back at home and things are settled down quite a bit.
Cool.
So I hope to have something out in the next few days. I have an old interview with Ben Stone that I'm going to try and whip something up with. And then I'm going to start getting into my original content, as well as putting in the stuff, or my separate content, as well as going with the stuff from Liberty Fest this year and the remaining stuff that I have from last year. From this year, I got an interview with Prof. CJ of the Dangerous History podcast, and it was in the middle of the night after a couple of cocktails. This is I get drunk. I get drunk about once or twice each year, and one or both times is at Liberty Fest. So we will have the Drunken History podcast. I haven't heard it yet.
Oh, nice.
So I don't think I made too big of an ass of myself, but I'll have the Drunken History podcast, and I also have one with Scott Horton of the Scott Horton Show and antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute. And I got another one with Dana that I think is going to be pretty short, and a couple other assorted ones, but that's the big stuff. So lousandershow.com, LOUSANDER show.com.
Good stuff. And I will put that in the show notes as well.
You can still find me at freedomfiends.com. I haven't done much stuff over there, but I hope to start putting out the occasional appearance.
Cool. That sounds good. Well, thank you again for your time. Stick around. I'm going to talk to you during the outro. But guys, thank you again for joining us, me and my guest Lou Sander. on My Fellow Americans. And we hope to see you again next week. I don't actually know who my guest is going to be next week, so that'll be a surprise for both of us. Matt's show, the Writer's Block, he's not doing an episode tomorrow. So you will see us again, me and Matt, next Tuesday on the Muddy Waters of Freedom. I have no idea what time, but we will be there, and we'll have our call-in so you can call us. And then I will be on Wednesday with my special surprise guest that I don't know even now. But again, thank you so much for joining us, and I will see you soon, and God bless you.
Can't make a change if you never try. We are not the same. That's a clever lie, disguised in guises like my skin with my friends. In reality, you are my kin, though I view the world through another's iris. If you slide in my kicks, it might fit. We might just unite and come together, become hybrid, at the least slightly like-minded. Indeed, the life I've lived brings light to kindness. All you need is a sign. Put a cease to the crimes. Put an ease to the minds like mine. Sometimes darkness is all I find. You know what they say about an eye for an eye and a time with the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny I would cry when a loved one dies? I recognize that body outside, but the holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's a pointless murder happening all the time. Either lose your life or mine, caught up in them versus I. That ain't how it started, nah. How were we supposed to survive? There's a war going on outside. Who would want to raise a child? Whom the tomb is flashing by. Now you have to say goodbye when you watch them on the news at 5. Don't tell me how, tell me why. In reality, you are my kin, though I view the world through another's iris. If you slide in my kicks, it might fit. We might just unite and come together, become hybrid, at the least slightly like-minded. Indeed, the life I've lived brings light to kindness. All you need